Chapter 2, reuniting the two of them shouted excitedly at the same time. Brother Rue, baby. Then, Zhouing threw herself into his arms and cried, You fool, you could have dodged it. Why did you come to save me? If I hadn't, how else would we be fated to be husband and wife again in this life? Gu Chungrui hugged her back and chuckled. However, tears also started to well in his eyes. He had thought they would be separated after death, but he did not expect they would be fated to continue to be together in this life. When he thought of this, he hugged her tightly, turning his head and gently kissing her cheek. But his kiss fell on nothing because Zhouing had already raised her head and reached out to his head and neck. It's so hot. I have to lower your temperature immediately. After saying that, she left his arms and tried to contact her inner space. It was a space that had followed her since she was young, a space that she couldn't see the end of. It was surrounded by seawater, and there was only an island in the middle that was about 1,000 square kilometers in size. There were mountains, water, and fields on the island, like a heavenly garden. As long as the inner space was still there, she would not have to worry about food and clothing no matter where she went. After confirming that the connection was still there, she was overjoyed and said, Brother Rue, wait a moment. They'll go to the inner space to get special fever medicine, food, and clothes. Gu Shengru's eyes lit up. Okay, remember to take some medicine yourself, just in case. Zhouing nodded in response and immediately flashed into her interspace. She did not stay after confirming the realm was still full of life, along with the cattle and sheep. She immediately went to the river that ran through the entire interspace to wash her hands. Then, she went to a warehouse inside a palace and took 2 cups of millet porridge, 4 veggie buns, a stack of cold medicine, and a few tablets of fever medicine. Finally, she also found 2 sets of thermal wear. After leaving the space, Zhouing put the food and medicine aside and said, Put this on to keep warm first. It's too cold today. After saying that, she took out a men's sweater and helped him put it on. She then covered him with the old quilt and handed him the porridge. Gu Chungrui took it and said, You should eat quickly too. Don't go starving. Zhouing nodded and quickly changed her clothes. She had a cup of millet porridge, a bun, and 4 cold medicine tablets. After that, she said, I'm going to cook now. We'll discuss further when you're a little better. All right, we'll leave after I recover. We can't stay in this house any longer. Gu Chungrui hesitated for a moment before finally nodding in agreement. Otherwise, he would only be a burden if he went out in his current state. The key was that, based on the current situation, he was the only one who could bring up the matter of splitting up with the family. If Zhouing was the one bringing it up, not only would it not solve the problem, but she might also be viewed with hostility and even get beaten up. Zhouing responded, turned around, and walked out of the woodshed with a bunch of firewood. When she saw the standard double-door courtyard with black tiles and green bricks outside, she really felt bad for the original couple. It seemed that they really had to leave this family as soon as possible. After that, she turned around and entered the kitchen next to them. After looking at the prepared ingredients, she couldn't be bothered to do something different. Instead, she cooked a pot of millet porridge, a tray of white steamed buns, fried cabbage and vinegar sauce, and mixed it with a plate of shredded salted vegetables according to how the original her cooked. When she was almost done with her work, everyone got up one after another. At the same time, she also recognized that the one who had woken her up before was the new wife of the Gu family's household, Mrs. Liu, and she had been promoted from a concubine. She was a middle-aged woman with beautiful looks. Perhaps it was because she had been suppressed too much by the princess in the past. Once promoted, she became arrogant and wanted to show off her authority everywhere. Instead of appearing dignified, she seemed to be copying the late princess. Chapter 3, the situation at the same time. She also realized that the Gu family was large. First of all, was the eldest matriarch of the Gu family, Gu Shengru's biological grandmother, Mrs. Qiao. The main family branch that the couple was staying in now had 1 wife and 1 concubine, 4 children consisting of 2 boys and 2 girls, and her, their daughter-in-law. There were even more people in the second family branch. They had 1 wife and 2 concubines, with 5 children, consisting of 2 boys and 3 girls. There was also Mrs. Yang, the wife of the eldest son, Gu Chengji, and the child in her stomach. As far as she knew, this was not all of them. After leaving the capital, all the concubines in the two family branches who did not bear children were dismissed on the spot. Therefore, she and Gu Chengrue were the only children his father disliked and had no mother. Naturally, they were bullied. After the meal was ready, a group of women quickly helped her to place the food in the dining hall. They sat at two tables, one for the men and one for the women. The dishes on the table were the same, but there were more steamed buns on the men's table. After everyone sat down, Zhou found that there was no seat for her. At this time, she also remembered that the original her had not eaten at the table since she entered the Gu family. When she thought of this, she felt a burst of anger. Seeing that there were still 3 steamed buns in the basket, she picked them up and turned to leave. Jinx, what are you doing? You can't eat steamed buns. Put them down. Mrs. Liu stood up and said, Aren't the steamed buns there for people to eat? Why can't I eat them? Zhou turned her head and asked with a smile. Then, she grabbed a steamed bun and took a bite. She even chewed a few times, loudly on purpose. She didn't look like she was eating a steamed bun, looking as if she was chewing them up on purpose. You Jinx. It's already good enough that you have something to eat. How dare you eat those steamed buns? Mrs. Liu raised her hand and pointed at her angrily. After she finished speaking, she stood up and wanted to grab it. But the old Madame Chiao saw Zhou Ying's abnormal attitude and immediately stopped her. All right, she's been busy the whole morning. It's just a steamed bun. Just let her eat it. She can just put the other 2 down. Everything in and out of the house depended on her, especially in the kitchen. If she really made a fuss and shirked the responsibility, it would be troublesome for them. Madam, Chengrue hasn't eaten yet. He's sick and can't survive without staple food. So, I have to take these 2 steamed buns with me. After Zhou finished speaking, she got ready to head out again. At that moment, her older brother-in-law, Gu Chengji, stood up and stopped her. Sister-in-law, you're going too far. You and your husband don't work, so you 2 can just share 1 bun. We still have to work in the workshop after dinner. We can't take it if we don't have enough. Not working. Zhou turned her head and asked with a faint smile. Then, she waved her hand in front of his eyes and said, We, husband and wife, do all the dirty and tiring work in this house. You should be very clear about this. Gu Qingji looked at her hands, which were rougher and redder than his own, and he didn't know what to say. Jinx, how could you speak like this to your older brother-in-law? When her second aunt, Mrs. Yao, heard her words, she immediately slammed the table and stood up. Without waiting for her to finish, Zhou immediately said, Stop. I think you know better than I do why the princess died and why the Gu family was raided. Don't push everything on me, and don't call me a jinx. I don't think I am worthy of being called that. Where's your upbringing? Is this how the Zhou family taught you to speak to your elders? The old madam put down her chopsticks and shouted angrily. Respect is mutual. We're about to die, so who cares about being polite? Zhou turned her head and looked straight at her. Chapter 4 Abandoned. The old madam was at a loss for words when she saw Zhou Ying's calm and sharp eyes. She asked in confusion, What do you mean you 2 are going to die? Aren't you still alive and well? Really? I was considered slightly chubby when I married into the Gu family. But look at my face now. I've lost so much weight in less than a month that I'm only left with a layer of skin. When Zhou said this, she deliberately pulled the skin on her face. She then continued, The nights these days are cold and long. Who could stand eating just porridge and doing heavy work every day? Last night, if it weren't for the warm water left on the stove, we would have frozen to death in the woodshed. Also, my husband's illness has been dragged on by the cold wind to become a lung inflammation. I'm afraid it will endanger his life if it's not treated. When Zhou said this, she lowered her head and looked at the steamed bun in her hands. So, not only does he need the steamed buns, but he also needs medical treatment. Look, everyone was shocked after hearing this. Although lung inflammation wasn't an incurable disease, the medicine used wouldn't be cheap. It's just a cold. It'll pass soon. It's not that serious. Mrs. Liu unhappily said, not waiting for the old madam to open her mouth. Cough, cough. Gu Chengrue lifted the curtain and slowly walked in. accompanied by a series of heart-wrenching coughs. Everyone immediately looked at him. When they saw his ashen face and skinny body, they were all shocked, especially the old madam. She really didn't expect that in just 2 days, the young man would become like this. It was no wonder Zhou Ying, who had always been silent and submissive, was full of thorns today. She was even dissing whoever she could. "Good morning, old madam, father, mother, second uncle, and second aunt." After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he gave a simple bow. Then, according to the original him's attitude, he looked at Zhou Ying and complained, "Why didn't you call me when it's time to eat? It's my fault. Your body is weak. You should sit down first." Zhou Ying's lips curved up as she immediately helped him to the men's seats. Mr. Gu quickly raised his hand to stop them. "Since you're sick, go back to your room and eat. Don't give everyone else your sickness." Gu Chungrui raised his head and looked at him coldly. He coughed and said, "You're right, but I'm afraid I can't get through this illness. Father, please give me some money to go to town and get some medicine." "Money? Money? How can we still have money at home? It's just a cold. After dinner, you can ask your wife to make you a bowl of ginger soup and sweat it out." Mrs. Liu didn't wait for Mr. Gu to speak and directly replied. Gu Chungrui did not even look at Mrs. Liu after hearing this. He wasn't born from Mrs. Liu's womb, so her attitude was unimportant. How he would get along with them in the future would ultimately depend on his father, Mr. Gu's, attitude. Unfortunately, Mr. Gu had no feelings for him to begin with. In addition to the recent series of blows, he subconsciously avoided the truth and decided to put all the blame on the couple. Otherwise, Mrs. Liu would not have dared to target and torment them like this. Therefore, he only glanced at him indifferently and said, "Listen to your mother. We really don't have any money. Is that so? Let's ignore that our relatives and friends gave us silver when we left the capital, a total of 50 taels of silver that we passed to the family. After returning to the village, the family received 100 taels of dividends from the family's oil mill. Was it all spent in less than 10 days? Gu Chungrui sneered. After we returned, we spent on food, clothes, beds, and furniture. Do you think we could do much with 100 taels of silver? Mrs. Liu counted with her fingers. Chapter 5 Splitting Up 1. That's right. On the way home, the officers exploited us a great deal. There was nothing left of the silver others gave us. Second Aunt Mrs. Yao agreed. Gu Shengru's heart turned cold, but at the same time, he was happy. The more ruthless they were today, the less guilt he would have in the future. As they were at an impasse, he swept his gaze across the room. Other than a teenager from the second branch, Gu Chengxi, who had no say in this and cast a sympathetic look at him, the others were either indifferent, ignoring him, or straight-up disdainful. In short, nobody cared about him, let alone spoke up for him. After another bout of coughing, Gu Chungrui looked at his father and said, "Since this family can't accommodate the two of us, let's just separate. We'll accept our fate, dead or alive." Third brother, what are you saying? We're all family. Why are you splitting up? Besides, who says this family can't accommodate you too? The old madam quickly said. Gu Chungrui turned to look at the old lady and said, "Old madam, does the family really not even have the money to treat your grandson's cold? Do you really not know what we've been through in the past half a month? Who here treats us as a family? Our treatment is probably even worse than that of a servant." You. The 3 questions made the old madam lost for words. She knew that even she had some spare money, let alone her 2 daughters-in-law. However, things were different now, so she had to keep some just in case. Thinking of this, she could only look at Mrs. Liu, hoping she could take out some silver to keep them. But Mrs. Liu met her eyes and avoided them. Her son and daughter were already of marriageable age. Their family didn't have a decent income, so how could they give money to others? Not to mention, if Gu Chungrui stayed at home, he would get a share of the family property if Mr. Gu died early. It was better to take advantage of this and directly shoo him away to save the trouble. Seeing Mrs. Liu's reaction, Mr. Gu naturally understood what she meant, so he directly said, "Then let's split. But other than the things in your house, there's nothing else for you. It seems my father doesn't want me as a son anymore. That's fine. In the future, whether we live or die will be our fate." At this point, Gu Chungrui coughed twice and took 2 deep breaths before saying, "However, words need to be written as proof. They'll have to trouble you to go with me to the family leader to write a written proof and the village chief to separate our household registration." Mr. Gu was furious after hearing that. At the same time, his expression was a little unnatural. A few days ago, he almost had a fallout with the family leader because he wanted to get back 100 acres of land that he had entrusted to the clan to look after in the early years, as well as the dividends from the workshop and the 2 officers' positions. If the family leader knew that he had separated his son from the family without giving a thing, who knows how he would laugh at him. However, he felt increasingly uncomfortable when he met Gu Shengru's firm eyes. In addition, Zhouing had already started to rebel. Thus, he felt it was better to kick them out of the house now. Therefore, he returned to the house to get the household registration book and said, "Then hurry up. The family leader will be going out in a while." Gu Chungrui responded and gently patted Zhou Ying's hand away. "Pack up our things and wait for me at home." Zhouing nodded. She quickly ate the steamed bun in her hand. Then, she put down the lunchbox and went to the kitchen to drink the remaining millet porridge. After that, she went back to her room to pack up. However, there wasn't much to pack. They each had a change of clothes, an old quilt, and a piece of coarse cloth curtain used to block the window. A bag was enough for them to pack it all up. Chapter 6 Splitting Up, 2. There were also 2 paper cups and the remaining medicine that Gu Chungrui had hidden. She put them away in her interspace. As for the people in the dining hall, they were eating and drinking as they should. No one came to greet them. Mrs. Liu, on the other hand, looked out from time to time. She was looking concerned, guarding against Zhouing for fear that she would steal things from the house. On the other hand, Gu Chungrui coughed nonstop when he came out of the door after catching a cold breeze. By the time he reached the family leader's house, his face and neck were already red from coughing. When the family leader saw this, he looked at him with disdain and asked them to sit down. He asked, "What's the matter? Coming here with you and your father?" "Big brother, my 3rd son wants to be separated. Please help me write a record," Mr. Gu said. Seeing this, the family leader looked at Gu Chungrui in dissatisfaction and said, "Chungrui, right? Your grandmother and parents are both still alive and well. It's against the rules for you to suggest splitting up at this time. Uncle, please do it for your nephew." Gu Chungrui raised his head and looked at him hesitantly. In the end, he sighed and shut his mouth. However, he quickly turned his head and bent over to cover his mouth as he coughed nonstop. He coughed so violently that it was as if he wanted to cough out his lungs at any moment. The family leader frowned. "Why didn't you find a doctor to take a look at him? He's coughing so much. Don't drag it out any longer." As soon as he finished speaking, Mr. Gu only nodded nonchalantly and did not reply. Gu Chungrui, on the other hand, had a bitter look on his face, but he had no intention of speaking. The leader could tell from their reactions that something was amiss. In addition to the rumors that circulated in the village, he did not try to persuade them any further. Instead, he asked, "Have you discussed what to give your 3rd son?" "Just the things in his room," Mr. Gu said vaguely. After the family leader heard this, he looked at the father and son in surprise. However, seeing that Gu Chungrui had no intention of fighting for it, he was too lazy to care. He got up and returned to the room to take out some stationery and draft the documents for their separation. At the end of his writing, he raised his head and asked the father and son, "Then what do you say about filial piety after the separation? If he has some, then give some. If he doesn't, then forget it," Mr. Gu said. Gu Chungrui heard his vague words and quickly said, "Although I didn't get any of the family property, my father raised me, so I will give my dues according to the normal customs of the village. I will share the medical expenses with my 2nd brother if my father is sick, but I will not be giving him the usual filial piety dues." Of course, Mrs. Liu is an exception to this. Although he and his girl didn't have any assets on the surface, they were undoubtedly rich just from the things in the inner space. Also, it was only a matter of time before they became the wealthiest people in the region. He didn't want them to latch themselves onto him in the future. Mr. Gu was stunned for a moment, but then he looked away as if nothing had been said. On the other hand, the family leader looked at Gu Chungrui and nodded in satisfaction. "That's reasonable. But you can't just stand by and watch if your father is sick and bedridden. I will. Gu Chengrui nodded heavily. After the family leader wrote this down, he made 2 copies. Then, the 3 signed and stamped their thumbprints, each holding 1 copy. After leaving the family leader's house, the father and son went to the village head's house to talk about the household registration. This time, it was unknown whether Mr. Gu wanted to save face or was really that eager to get rid of them, but he took the initiative to pay the processing fee. After Mr. Gu left, Gu Chengrui looked at the village chief and asked, Grandpa Qian, is there any house in the village that I can rent? After a moment of hesitation, the village chief replied, I don't know about this. I'll ask around for you later, but you have to pay more attention to it. I'm sorry to trouble you. After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he bowed and turned to leave. Just as he arrived back at the Gu family, he met Zhou, who was carrying a large bag and was driven out by Mrs. Liu. Chapter 7, Temporarily Staying at the Mother God Temple. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui coldly glanced at Mrs. Liu. After seeing her retreat, he took Zhou Ying's bag from her and left. Zhou Ying immediately followed him. When she saw him coughing nonstop, she quickly took out a small bottle of cough syrup from her inner space and handed it to him. Rui, you should drink a bottle of cough syrup first. Gu Chengrui looked at the small medicine bottle in front of him. He grabbed her hand and scanned their surroundings. After making sure that no one was paying attention, he whispered, Hurry up and put it away. I can still hold it in. After we have settled down, they'll just get 2 bottles of 4 into me. Hearing this, Zhou Ying put the cough syrup back into her inner space and said, All right then, don't force yourself. Don't worry. I'm much better after taking medicine this morning. By the way, where are we going? You know about the Mother God Temple halfway up the mountain, right? Zhou Ying nodded and said, Yes, I've seen that before. Although it's a little shabby, it's a good place to stay for the time being after some simple cleaning. Thus, the 2 of them helped each other up the mountain. When they arrived at the Mother God Temple, Gu Chengrui was coughing so much that he could not stand up straight. Zhou Ying glanced around, and after making sure that there was no one nearby, she said, Rui, you can't delay your illness any longer. They'll send you into my inner space to get 2 4 bottles into you. After Zhou Ying finished speaking, she immediately looked around to ensure no one was nearby. Then, she helped him into the Mother God Temple. She helped him to the back of a statue and brought him into the space, reaching the villa they had built by the river. After helping Gu Chengrui lie down on the bed, Zhou Ying asked him for a list of his needed medicines. Then, she went to the warehouse to prepare the medicines, put him on an 4 drip, and made him a cup of honey water as he requested. After his condition had stabilized, she took a bucket of water and a broom from the space. After that, she cleaned up the Mother God Temple, which was close to 100 square feet in size, and sprayed a large amount of disinfectant. After cleaning up, Zhou Ying looked at the statue of the Mother God that had been weathered, all shabby looking. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt sad and thought the statue looked dear to her. I have no choice but to stay here. Sorry for the disturbance, she bowed respectfully. Afterward, she took a rope from her inner space and went outside to pick up some firewood. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain if someone found out that there were no signs of them living in the temple. After she came out, she realized that the river running through the village was right below the Mother God Temple. This was a good place, with a mountain next to a river. Then, she went directly up the mountain but did not get much firewood. Instead, she found a small nest of licorice, which she dug out and tied up. After she was done digging, her stomach began to growl. She carried the licorice on her back and returned to the Mother God Temple. After putting down the firewood, she walked behind the statue and stayed there for a while. After making sure that no one was nearby, she entered her inner space with the licorice. As soon as she arrived at the villa's entrance, she smelled the fragrance of cooking meat. She quickly put down the licorice and went to the bathroom to wash her hands. Then, she turned around and walked into the kitchen. When she saw the busy figure inside, she walked over and put her arms around his waist from behind. Why didn't you wait for me to come back? You're still coughing so badly. You shouldn't be inhaling the smell of smoke. I had nothing to do, so I stir-fried a plate of veggies and pressure-cooked some pork ribs along with corn soup. Gu Chengrui smiled and turned his head. Then, he looked up, picked up a dead leaf on her head, and said, "Hurry up and set up the table. We'll be eating soon." "Yes, sir." Zhouing responded, turned around, and took 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks. She carried the garlic-flavored veggies to the dining room. On the other hand, Gu Chungrui had also finished cooking. He placed the ribs into the soup and followed her. After that, they sat down and had a good meal. After the meal, Gu Chungrui took a tissue from the side and handed it to her. "Baby, did you get anything from the mountain?" Chapter 8 Inner Space. I was going to pick up some firewood, but there really wasn't much to pick up in the outer area. I did find a small nest of licorice and brought it back. "Licorice?" Gu Shengru's eyes lit up, and he continued, "This place is about 5 miles away from town. Let's go to town in the afternoon. Take the licorice you dug up and some red sage and astragalus from the mountains in your inner space. Buy a pot or a crock when you return, and some food as a cover. But your body," Zhouing was concerned. "I'm fine. The medicine has already taken effect. I can handle it." "All right, then you can boil a kettle of water to drink. We'll go wash the dishes." After Zhouing finished speaking, she put away the bowls and chopsticks on the table. After washing the dishes, she went to the warehouse again to get more medicine. But this time, it was an amount large enough for him to use for 3 days. After that, the two drank some water and rested for a while. After he drank his medicine, the two took their tools and went up the mountain. Then, according to Gu Shengru's instructions, she dug out about 2 pounds of red sage and 5 pounds of astragalus before stopping. They stopped in front of an apple tree. Zhouing reached out and picked 2, then handed one to Gu Chungrui. She turned around and sat on a big rock, eating the apple while scanning the entire island with her mind. To the east of the island was a group of mountains, covering an area of nearly 100 square kilometers. However, it had been slowly transformed by the two of them. Now, in addition to some precious medicinal herbs and trees, they had also planted all kinds of fruit trees, dried fruit trees, tea trees, and all kinds of medicinal herbs. Of course, they also raised a batch of bees, which could produce a large amount of honey every year. The river flowing down the mountain divided the land at the foot of the mountain into 2, but it was not even. One side was larger than the other, about a 2-to-1 ratio. There were all kinds of freshwater fish and prawns in the river. Because of the rapid flow of the river at the foot of the mountain, they had also built a small hydraulic power station, which could supply electricity for the entire inner space. On the smaller side of the plain, she had plowed it into a field and planted sweet potatoes and taro. Now, there were herds of cattle and sheep on it. In the middle, there were also donkeys, deer, pigs, and various kinds of livestock, such as chickens. At the same time, they also planted some trees in the fields, such as coconuts, olives, bay laurel, and some other oil-based trees, which were just enough to separate the various groups of animals. Something worth mentioning was that there were also some sea ducks and swallows herding near the grass on the beach. In the past, just the sea duck eggs and bird nests were a significant income. On the larger side of the plain next to the river was their small 2-story villa at the foot of the mountain. Below, it was an industrial area of about 100 acres and a drying area of 100 acres. They were all factories with extremely low pollution for processing agricultural products and food. Behind the industrial area was the palace that was initially present in the inner space that covered an area of 10 acres. There was a warehouse with no end in sight, storing a large number of materials that they had prepared for a possible apocalypse. They couldn't enter any of the other rooms except for the study room, which was one of the reasons why they had built another villa. The rest of the land was planted with all kinds of crops. Because the inner space was similar to a subtropical climate, they could plant 3 seasons in a year, giving them an impressive annual output. Of course, the labor needed was quite large. Fortunately, the inner space had a user-friendly option when it came to farming. She could control her inner space with her mental power, and the river water could fertilize the fields. Otherwise, she really wouldn't be able to manage all of these. At the same time, Gu Chungrui, who had sat down with her, finished an apple and bumped into her. "You are surveying the mountains and rivers again. Have there been any changes?" "Yes, the crops are almost ripe. We'll be busy tonight." Chapter 9 Selling Medicine 1. Then he'll extract some peanut oil for later. Gu Chungrui helped her up after he finished speaking. After that, the two brought the medicinal herbs down the mountain and packed them separately into a broken sack. Gu Chungrui carried them on his back and left the inner space to rush to town. When they met other people on the way, the two greeted them politely regardless of their attitude. The first was to win the villagers' favor so they could integrate into the village as soon as possible. The other reason was to let them know they went to town to sell medicinal herbs. It was an excuse for their money source so that Mrs. Liu would not frame them for stealing money in the future. When they arrived in the town, Zhouing found that this small town was really lively. It was especially so at the pier outside the town, which was densely packed with all kinds of people. I heard that the Gu family used to rely on river transportation to make a fortune, right? She turned to ask Gu Chungrui. Yes, at first it was river transportation, then it developed into sea transportation. It can be said that transportation is the Gu family's pillar industry. This small town is really a good place with connections. As long as you have the brains, you can still make a living even if you don't make a fortune. It seems like we have to make a good plan. Yes, but we have to do it slowly. Otherwise, it'll be troublesome if we get targeted. After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he pulled her hand and walked forward. On the way, they found a tea stall and inquired about the various medicine shops in the town. The two went directly to the poorest medicine shop owned by the Luo family. Because one of the other two shops was owned by the Gu family's rival, the Qiao family, and they had been suppressing the Gu family during this period of time. If they were recognized, they would only be humiliated. The other family that owned the other shop had connections with the capital, so they naturally didn't want to go there. Dear guests, do you want to see the doctor or get medicine? As soon as they entered, a boy grinding medicinal herbs at the counter immediately stood up and greeted them. I'm here for the doctor to get medicine, but also to sell medicine. After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he placed the sack against the counter. When the boy saw this, he opened the sack and took a look. When he saw the medicinal ginseng inside, he immediately greeted them warmly and asked them to sit down. Wait a moment. I'll go find my master. After he finished, he ran to the back door and shouted, Master, there's a patient. After that, he sat down and started to grind the herbs again. Not long after, a white-haired old man walked out and sat in front of a table. Young man, come over and sit. Gu Chungrui stood up, walked over and sat down. He stretched out his hand and said, You're amazing. You could tell at a glance that I'm the one who needs treating. At the same time, Zhouing also perked up her ears to listen. Although the Luo family's medical skills are not well known, they have been passed down for 100 years. Some common diseases should not be a problem for me. Dr. Luo replied, then closed his eyes and took Gu Chengrui's pulse seriously. After a moment, he looked at him with a surprised face and said, Have you taken any medicine? The effect is quite good. Gu Chengrui was convinced of his skills now. He then nodded and said, An elder gave it to me, but I've finished it. Do you know the prescription? The medicine is very effective. Dr. Luo hurriedly asked. Gu Chengrui shook his head. I don't know, but I heard it's a pill made after concentrating some essence. After Dr. Luo heard this, he nodded thoughtfully. Then, he wrote a prescription for him and said, Take 3 of them and let's see how it would go. After he finished writing, he handed the prescription to his apprentice. Gu Chengrui stood up and called Zhouing over. Dr. Luo, it'll have to trouble you to take a look at my wife. Chapter 10 Selling Medicine 2. Dr. Luo nodded and took Zhou Ying's pulse. Mental and physical fatigue, malnutrition, and a chilly body. You will have to be more careful in the future. Otherwise, it'll be complicated to get pregnant. Then it'll have to trouble you to prescribe 2 doses of medicine for her to recuperate. Gu Chengrui said. I'll prescribe her 2 doses of cold-expelling medicine. As for the rest, it will have to rely on her to rest to heal. Understood. Gu Chengrui nodded. After the doctor finished writing the prescription, Gu Chengrui carried the sack over and said, There are also some wild medicinal herbs here. Please help me take a look. Oh, Dr. Luo replied, with curiosity. When he saw the sage, which was a type of red sage, his eyes lit up excitedly. Red sage, a good quality red sage. Ahem. The apprentice coughed and reminded him. He was reminding the doctor that he was overly excited. Wouldn't this clearly tell them that they lack this medicine? Gu Chungrui glanced at him, then asked Dr. Luo curiously, "Why? Is this red sage very rare?" The growing conditions for red sage were not harsh, so it should not be that rare. At this time, Dr. Luo also realized that he had lost his composure and had even revealed his bottom line. He could only laugh dryly and reply, "The red sage is not hard to come by, but there is a drought in the northern part of the country, so the production is low and the quality is poor." A drought in the north? Why didn't I hear about it? It's not too serious, so it hasn't spread yet, but the reduction in production is certain. Then what is the price of this red sage? Although your red sage is good, it's a fresh one, so I can only give you 100 copper coins. Dr. Luo rubbed his chin and pondered. Gu Chungrui heard the high price and nodded. Then, "Please take a look at the astragalus and licorice," Wang Yao said. Dr. Luo opened it and took a look. As the quality wasn't bad, he directly said, "The price of the astragalus is 20 copper coins per pound, and the price of licorice is only 5 copper coins per pound." "Sure, please weigh it." "Sure, wait a moment." After Dr. Luo finished speaking, he went to the back and took a scale, weighing them one by one. 2 pounds of red sage, 5 pounds of astragalus, and 15 pounds of licorice. In total, they got 375 copper coins. After deducting the 75 copper coins for the medicine money, the two of them had 300 copper coins left. When Dr. Luo sent them out enthusiastically, he said, "If the two of you have time, you can find more red sages. If the quality is good, I will take them all." "All right, they'll remember this." Gu Chungrui cupped his hands in salute and left the medicine shop with Zhou Ying. Gu Chungrui turned his head when they were outside and said, "Babe, think about what we should buy." Zhou Ying pondered and replied, "A pot, rice, salt, and vegetables are just what we need. We'll think about the rest later." "You're right. Let's take a look at the rice and noodles first." Gu Chungrui pointed at the grain store not far away after he finished. Zhou Ying nodded and followed him. "What would you like to buy, dear customers?" The shop assistant said politely after letting them in. "What's the price of this refined rice?" Gu Chungrui pointed at the rice in the best condition and asked. "The polished rice is 8 copper coins. The crushed rice and unpolished rice are 6 copper coins." The shop assistant replied. "What about white flour?" Zhou Ying asked, pointing at the yellowish-white flour. 8 copper coins on the polished flour, 5 copper coins on the unrefined ones. The shop assistant turned his head and said. Then, he saw her walk to the millet section and said, "Both millet and long grain rice are 5 copper coins each, river-planted rice is 10 copper coins, and sorghum rice is 3 copper coins." After Zhou Ying and Gu Chungrui looked at each other, they were both astonished. It seemed that the prices here were not low. No wonder Mrs. Liu had to calculate their food expenses. "Then give us 5 pounds of polished rice and 2 pounds of millet," Zhou Ying said. "As for the bags, we'll buy them from the shop." Chapter 11 Concern. "All right, please wait a moment," the shop assistant replied and turned around to weigh the items. Meanwhile, Gu Chungrui walked around the shop seriously and found that all the grains were processed quite crudely. Take the polished rice, for example. There were still some rice grains with broken shells inside. The refined flour couldn't even be held up to the standards they had in their world in the 80s. It seemed that he would have to change the standard of their flour when he processed them in the future. After the two of them left the grain shop, they went to buy a pot and some salt. These two were even more expensive. The salt was 20 copper coins per pound, and it was a large grain salt. Thus, they only asked for half a pound to put up a front. A 3-liter double-handle cast iron pot actually costs 150 copper, and a hatchet costs 50 copper coins. They did not have many copper coins left after leaving the blacksmith shop. Therefore, the two had to go back. On the way, they spent 15 copper coins to buy a pound of lard, 5 copper to buy a bamboo chopping board, and finally 2 copper to buy 2 small cabbages. By the time the two of them returned to the Mother God Temple, the sun was about to set. Gu Chungrui put down his things and said, "Babe, take out the pot and knife. We'll go and get some firewood." "All right, come back soon." After Zhou Ying finished speaking, she took a bucket of water from her interspace, then found 2 stones to prop up a stove. She then used hot water to wash the pot, knife, and chopping board. Then, she squeezed out some hot oil and soaked the pot, knife, and chopping board with it before letting them dry. Then, she took out a piece of tofu, 2 handfuls of vermicelli, and a clay pot from her inner space. She made a clay pot of tofu and cabbage. At this moment, she realized that they hadn't prepared any bowls or spoons, so she had to take one from her inner space. When she was almost done with her work, Gu Chungrui returned with a small bundle of firewood. Zhouing immediately went up and reached out to take the firewood. Gu Chungrui dodged. "I'll do it. Don't get your hands dirty." After he finished speaking, he put the firewood aside and threw a few logs into the fire. "I remember that there was a lot of firewood stored in the space. I will take out some more later. The wind outside is quite cold, and the fire should stay lit. Okay, wash your hands, and let's eat first. We'll talk after dinner." After Zhouing finished speaking, she took out 6 fist-sized steamed buns from her space. After the 2 of them had a hot meal, they sat around the fire to boil the medicine. After finishing their medicine, Zhouing put the clay pot, bowls, and utensils back into her inner space. She turned her head and saw Gu Chungrui staring at the moon through the window. She pursed her lips and walked over to sit on the stone beside him. "Are you homesick?" Gu Chungrui lifted his hand and pulled her into his arms. "That's right. I wonder how things are at home. Will that kid, Chungjun, be able to take over?" "Don't worry, don't be fooled by that kid's flippant attitude. He's pretty intelligent and filial. Without you in front of him, he'll definitely take over. As for money, with the ecological farms and food city we left behind, as long as he manages it well, he can live without worry about food and clothing for the rest of his life." Gu Chungrui grunted softly. He turned his head and kissed her forehead gently. He hugged her tightly and did not say anything else. Zhouing also cooperated by leaning into his arms, finding a comfortable position and closing her eyes. At the same time, she felt a little melancholic because she had no one else to worry about other than him. In her previous life, her parents divorced when she was 3 years old and left her to her grandfather, who was a chef. In the 2nd year of middle school, her grandfather suddenly passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage. Her father even took back the old house and savings under the urging of her stepmother. If not for the inner space, she would not even be able to survive, let alone go to school. It was not until she met Gu Chungrui in the martial arts club in college that she felt truly alive. Chapter 12. Can't eat. Her current life wasn't any better. Although her father was the head of the Imperial Academy of Medicine, it was said that when she was born and her mother died from a difficult birth, he didn't even show his face. As such, she had grown up in the kitchen with her mother's good friend, who was her adoptive mother in this life. It was only when he heard that the Gu family was going to give the princess a marriage blessing that he remembered her. However, after receiving their betrothal gift, he kicked her out of the house with a shabby dowry. So, if she really had someone to worry about, it could only be her adoptive mother. The 2 of them sat in silence for a while until the temperature in the temple dropped. They got up and walked around outside. After making sure no one was around, they returned to the inner space. Then, Zhouing first took out a bag of whole wheat flour from the warehouse and made 50 pounds of noodles. Then, she began to harvest various matured crops in the space with her mental power. Meanwhile, Gu Chungrui drove a modified electric car across the river and began feeding the various animals they raised. He also checked their health and pregnancy status. After Zhouing finished harvesting, she turned around and went into the workshop to use the dough press, oven, and blender to steam 400 whole wheat buns and 200 beef and scallion buns. Finally, she returned to the villa and cooked a pot of purple rice porridge with a pot of assorted vegetables. After finishing her work, she took a hot shower, put on her pajamas, and dried her hair. When she sprayed on her skin lotion, she carefully sized up her appearance in this life. She looked at least 80% similar to her previous life. She had an oval face, squinty eyes, a straight nose, and a slightly thicker, cherry-like mouth. In a way, her looks were more refined than those of her previous life. However, her pasty and dry skin made her overall look dull. It seemed that she had to take good care of it. As for her body, it was well developed. She was about 1.65 meters tall, and it would be perfect if she could grow another 3 to 5 centimeters. After Gu Chungrui finished his work, he put away the peanuts she had dried and went to the oil mill to squeeze about 100 pounds of peanut oil. When he returned to the house, he saw her looking smugly in front of the mirror. He smiled and walked over to her, sizing her up. "You still looked beautiful, but a little young. I can't eat you up." Zhou Ying's lips curved into a naughty smile. She leaned in and kissed his ear. "Are you sure?" Gu Chungrui felt the familiar, gentle, feather-like teasing and the breath that blew into his ear. His ears suddenly felt itchy, and he subconsciously turned his head. At the same time, a sense of lust rushed into his head, causing his mind to buzz and go blank. His ears also turned red. However, he reacted quickly. He turned around and quickly kissed her on the neck, then quickly took off his clothes and rushed into the bathroom. Zhou Ying was stunned for a moment, then touched the place where she was kissed with a face of dissatisfaction. But she suddenly laughed when she turned her head and looked at his back. After a while, she finished applying her toner and put away their clothes. She washed them in the washing machine and dried them before bringing them to the bedroom. Then, she washed a few sets of underwear that were suitable for their current figures. Soon, Gu Chungrui came out in his sleeping robe and twisted his long hair with a depressed look. Zhou Ying quickly stepped forward and said, "You can't twist your long hair like this. You have to wipe it gently. Otherwise, it will easily be damaged. That's why we can only use the hairdryer to dry it quickly." Then, she took the towel and started to rub it gently. "I used to do your hair smoothly," Chungrui said gloomily. "It's awkward when I'm doing it to my hair." Chapter 13 Dream. "That's because I usually dry to a certain extent. Besides, you will get used to it slowly." After Zhou Ying finished speaking, she was almost done drying his hair. Then, she brought him to the mirror and started to blow dry his hair layer by layer. After cleaning up, the two of them each had a bowl of purple rice porridge with some side dishes and went back to their bedroom to rest. As soon as Zhou Ying laid down, she saw Gu Chungrui holding a pillow, blanket, and clothes while he walked out. She was stunned for a moment and asked, "What are you?" "You're 16 now, and I'm 17. We are both too young. For the sake of our physical and mental health, we should sleep separately for the time being." Gu Chungrui looked at her deeply and walked out after he finished speaking. After Zhou Ying heard it, she was taken aback shortly. In the end, she approved of that notion. They shouldn't take it too hard with their current bodies. It was better to avoid that kind of suffering. After lying down, she thought she would have to get used to her new bed, but she didn't expect to fall asleep the instant her head touched the pillow. On the other hand, Gu Chungrui, who was in their study, laid down after setting the alarm for 6 o'clock. He turned over a few times, got up, and drank 2 bottles of cough syrup before he fell asleep. The alarm clock rang the following day, and Gu Chungrui woke up instantly. He looked at his thin and weak arms, stunned for a moment, but quickly remembered that they had transmigrated. Thinking of the current situation, he quickly got up and changed his clothes to go downstairs to find Zhou Ying. They had to get out as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain if they were found out that they were not in the Mother God Temple. When he arrived at the master bedroom, he saw that Zhou Ying was still asleep. He didn't know what kind of sweet dream she was having, but she had her mouth wide open, smiling, and her drool was flowing out. Even though he couldn't bear to wake her up, he still went up to the bed and pinched her little nose. "You're so annoying. Go away." Zhou Ying slapped his hand away and shouted subconsciously, and she woke up after that. When she saw him, she paused for a moment before she quickly regained her senses. However, she still yawned and asked, with a tired expression, "What time is it now?" "I just fell asleep." After she finished speaking, she threw herself into his arms and closed her eyes. Gu Chungrui shook his head. He rubbed her stomach and said, "Get up. If you're tired, we can go to the mountains and return for a nap." When Zhou Ying heard this, she immediately remembered that they should be living in a broken temple with no doors or windows. She immediately sat up and said, "You're right. We can't let anyone steal our stuff." After the two of them quickly washed up, they went out of the inner space. When they just got out, they shivered from the cold while Gu Chungrui started coughing. "Rue," Zhou Ying was worried. "You should go back to my inner space first." You can come out after I start the fire. Let's do it together. I'm worried about you being alone outside. Zhouing didn't try to persuade him anymore. Instead, she took a bundle of ordinary firewood from her interspace. She also took out some alcohol and a hand blower to start a fire quickly. Then, the two of them worked together and soon started the fire. Zhouing took out the small pot and heated the remaining purple rice porridge from last night. She also took 3 beef buns and 2 cucumbers. When they were almost done eating, Gu Chungrui asked curiously, "Baby, what dream did you have this morning? You were smiling so wide that you were drooling." Zhouing suddenly felt embarrassed, but when she remembered the dream, she smiled and replied, "I dreamed that I had become a fairy, and I didn't have to work so hard to harvest the crops in my space anymore. I could do it with a wave of my hand. With a wave of my hand, I could speed up the growth of our crops and instantly stir up a large area of the sea. I felt my power was boundless, just like the mighty beings in fantasy novels." Gu Chungrui thoughtfully asked, "Are you tired from rushing to work yesterday?" "No, maybe I just wanted to be lazy. It's just a dream. Don't take it seriously." Zhouing shook her head. Chapter 14. Going up the mountain. We should be more careful in the future. We don't have to worry about food and clothing, so there's no need to tire ourselves this much. That's right. Zhouing nodded in agreement. Do you have anything you want to plant next? You can make the arrangements. I don't mind. Gu Chungrui paused briefly and said, "Babe, do you want to plant some sweet potatoes? The production of sweet potatoes is usually high and provides a good filling. We can spread the seeds to help our descendants when we have the opportunity." "This is possible. Maybe it can solve the food problem of the country." Zhouing asked curiously, "That's right. Do you have any information on the Ming dynasty's imperial family? How is the current emperor? If he's a vile character, we'll have to be careful." After Gu Chungrui heard this, he tried his best to recall the original owner's memories. After a moment of silence, he replied thoughtfully, "It's hard to say. I heard that a few years ago, the emperor was diligent, loved the people, and also kind. However, in recent years, he has become increasingly suspicious of his court. Everyone else attributed it to the fact that the princes had grown up and the imperial court had begun to form factions. However, according to my analysis, this emperor is probably an untrustful person by nature. The few families that supported him to the throne back then were either far away from the central imperial court or had gradually declined, including the Gu family that had once given him financial support. Most importantly, the princess did not have a child in her entire life. No one knew the specific reason. Oh right, the third prince is in charge of the navy of this place. His reputation is quite good, so it is possible that we can get to know him better. Then we'll wait and see. Yes, there's no rush." After the two finished their meal, they began to boil their medicine. When they were almost done, they suddenly heard footsteps approaching. Zhouing immediately put away the things that should not have appeared in her space, while Gu Chungrui got up and walked to the door. The second branch's illegitimate son, Gu Chengxi, saw him come out and was stunned for a moment. He quickly walked over and asked, "Third brother, you and your wife are really staying here?" "Yup. Are you going up the mountain to collect firewood?" Gu Chungrui asked after he saw the basket on his back and nodded. "Yeah, they'll be the one to chop the firewood in the house from now on." After Gu Chengxi finished speaking with a bitter smile, he sized him up seriously and asked, with some worry, "How are you doing? Is your body getting better?" Much better. I was lucky to find some medicinal herbs when I went up the mountain yesterday. I went to town to exchange them for 2 sets of medicine and food. No wonder I could smell the strong smell of medicine at the foot of the mountain. Do you want to come in and sit down?" Gu Chengxi hesitated for a moment and shook his head. "Forget it. I still have to go gather firewood. Do you want to come along?" "You go first. They'll go up the mountain after I've finished my medicine. Then I will take his leave first." After Gu Chengxi finished speaking, he turned around and walked toward the dense forest on the mountain. Gu Shengrui's eyes softened as he watched him disappear into the distance. No matter what the reason was, at least this little guy was sincere with them. As long as he could maintain that, Gu Chungrui might be able to help him out in the future. After that, they turned around and returned to the temple. The two put away all their belongings and went deep into the mountains. However, They went in the opposite direction of Guchengshi. After entering the mountain, the two of them made marks as they looked for medicinal herbs and collected firewood. When they arrived at a place where people rarely came, Zhouing sent Gu Chengrue into her interspace to get in for drip. Meanwhile, she continued to look for firewood and medicinal herbs nearby. While she was tying the firewood, she suddenly heard the cry of a chicken coming from above her head. Then, something hit her body, giving her a big fright. Chapter 15. Tian Jiaowang. As a result, she lost her balance and fell to the side. Although a small tree stopped her, her head still hit the tree. She saw stars, and tears instantly welled up in her eyes. The hatchet in her hand also flew out of her hand and into the grass not far from the hillside. At this time, a burly man wearing a rabbit skin vest and carrying a basket of arrows on his back quickly scuttled out from the side. When he saw her, he was stunned for a moment and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, miss. Are you hurt?" "Maybe not a concussion, but there's definitely a big bump on my head." After Zhouing stood up, she rubbed the back of her head and glared at him. The burly man was taken aback. Although he didn't understand what a concussion was, he understood that she must have hit her head. "I'm sorry, miss. I really didn't see you. Do take this wild chicken as an apology." He scratched his head with a dry smile. After he finished speaking, he picked up the wild pheasant that had been shot to death by an arrow, pulled out the arrow, and handed the pheasant to her. Zhouing turned her head and looked at the pheasant in his hand. Although it was not big, it was beautiful with its colorful feathers. Then, she looked at the man. Although he had a big frame, he was skinny. The clothes he wore were full of patches. It appears that his family's condition was not good. She hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. "Forget it. I'm not really hurt. Keep it for yourself." The burly man looked at her in surprise. After taking a closer look, he found her somewhat familiar. Then, he asked with uncertainty, "You're a new member of the Gu family, right?" Zhouing looked at him warily and said, "Who are you?" The burly man quickly confirmed her identity, but he did not expect her to lose so much weight. Then, he handed the wild chicken to her again and said, "My name is Tian Jiaowang, and I live at the foot of the mountain at Shanghe village. Do take this wild chicken as my apology. By the way, don't go further into the mountains. There are wild boars in there." After he finished speaking, he quickly left. Seeing this, Zhouing no longer refused the pheasant. She threw the pheasant and firewood into her interspace and then went to the tall grass to find her hatchet. She didn't expect to find a nest of gastrodia roots as well. She immediately put away her hatchet, took out a military shovel, and started digging. After she finished digging, she realized that she had dug up a total of half a sack of gastrodia roots. She was instantly overjoyed. With these gastrodia roots, they would have enough money to rent a house. She looked up at the sky and realized that it was already midday. After making sure no one was around, she brought the gastrodia roots into the inner space. Gu Chengrue, anxiously waiting in the interspace, immediately stepped forward to greet her when he saw her. When he saw the blood on her clothes, he quickly asked, "Why is there so much blood on your body? Did you hurt yourself?" When Zhouing heard him say this, she suddenly felt her head start hurting again. She immediately lowered her head and pointed at her wound. "I'm injured. Hurry up and take a look at the back of my head." Gu Chengrue immediately took her hand away and checked it. When he saw the wound, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Fortunately, it's just a bump. It'll be fine after a few days of careful nursing." After he said that, he took out some safflower oil from the first aid kit and applied it to her before asking, "What happened? Why are you injured?" Zhouing didn't hide anything. She told him directly about how Tian Jiaowang shot the pheasant and scared her. "By the way, do you know him? I think he's a good guy, so I didn't make things difficult for him. I have some impressions of him. He's a pretty good person, but his life is tough." Gu Chengrue nodded and replied. When the original owner of his body went up the mountain to chop firewood, he came into contact with him. He had even helped the original owner carry firewood down. He could be said to be one of the few people in the village who did not discriminate against the two of them. Chapter 16. Regret, a tough life? Yes, I heard that his parents passed away when he was young, and he grew up with his sister. He had finally married, but his wife died in childbirth. Soon after, his brother-in-law was killed by a wild boar, and his sister and her 2 daughters were out of their in-laws' home. With a situation like this, unless he has a fortuitous encounter or his sister remarries with the 2 children, his remarriage will be even more difficult. He sounds like a person who values relationships and loyalty, Zhouing said, while her stomach began to growl. Her face turned red when she heard that. Gu Chengrui paused for a moment and put away the first aid kit. Go and wash your hands. I made your favorite duck blood rice noodles. Really? I love you so much. After Zhouing said that, she pounced on him and kissed him. Then, she turned around and washed her face. After the meal, the 2 left the inner space together and followed the markings back. On their way back, they found some wild angelica. When they reached the edge of the mountains, they saw that the number of people had gradually increased. The 2 of them each carried a bundle of firewood and a sack as they walked toward the Mother God temple. Back in the temple, Zhouing took out the pheasant and let Gu Chengrui kill it while she peeled some chestnuts for herself. They stewed a small pot of chestnuts, roasted the pheasant, and had a good meal. While they were eating happily, the Gu family's residence was a mess. It was because when it was time for dinner, they realized that the water in the tank had already reached the bottom. The main wife complained about the second wife's laziness, asking why she didn't refill the water after cooking. The second wife complained that the main wife was being sly. She complained that the first wife should have refilled the water tank after she cooked and deliberately left it empty to blame her. When old Madame Chow heard the noise outside, she was so angry that she knocked her walking stick on the ground and said, "Stop quarreling. What are you all doing? You're acting like a bunch of shrews. Mother, you have to help me. The main wife is clearly bullying me." Mrs. Yao said with an aggrieved expression, "Sister, you're wrong. You're the one on duty today. How can you blame it on us?" Mrs. Lu said indignantly, "But yesterday, you guys..." Mrs. Yao still wanted to argue, but the old madam impatiently interrupted. "Shut up, all of you. Look at what you 2 are doing. In the future, divide the work into different categories, and whoever gets their turn will be the one to do it. Whoever can't finish is not allowed to eat." "But the second household has 1 more person than our first household," Mrs. Lu said, with a face full of grievance. "The first household had more. But who was it that forced the 3rd son and his wife to leave?" The old madam glared at her and said, "That's right. If Chengrui and his wife were here, we wouldn't even need to do something like this." Mrs. Yao immediately agreed. At the same time, she was a little regretful. If she had known that the housework would be so tedious, she would have asked the young couple to stay. However, the old madam rolled her eyes at her. "What's the point of lamenting about it now? It was too late to regret it now," Mrs. Lu retorted. "You acted as if you had tried to make them stay when they wanted to leave. Why didn't you ask them to stay when they discussed paying for their medicine? If you were willing to pay for it..." Before she could finish her sentence, the old madam interrupted her. "All right, what's the use of complaining now? Go and do whatever you need to do." However, she also remembered that their family was short of money. She then looked at the concubine of the second branch, Mrs. Huang, and asked, "Mrs. Huang, I remember that your embroidery is not bad, right?" "It's all right. I learned it from an old nanny in the palace." Mrs. Huang was astonished by the question for a moment before she replied. Chapter 17 Ideas 1. That's good. You will go to the embroidery workshop tomorrow and take some work back. Bring your 5 sisters to do some embroidery work to earn money for food. As for the work at home, you and your daughter should not interfere in the future. "Yes, old madam. I will go and get a job tomorrow." Mrs. Huang hesitated for a moment. Although she was worried that it would tire her eyes, she thought of the heavy physical work she would have to do otherwise and finally nodded. Although Mrs. Lu and the others were jealous, they knew they were not cut out for it. This was why they didn't say anything, since this would bring in more income for the family. Since no one has any objections, it's settled then. You guys will take turns in the future. Whoever messes up again can forget about eating. In addition, tell the 5 of them to learn embroidery properly when you go back. Whoever doesn't want to work will have to work in the fields.
Yes.
They immediately responded in unison. All right, you guys can cook dinner together tonight. Hurry up and get back to work. After the old lady finished speaking, she got up and returned to her room. Although Mrs. Liu and the others had their thoughts, their stomachs were unbearably hungry, so they didn't delay any longer and started to work. The old madam thought that the problem had been solved in time but didn't know that her neighbor on the right, the sixth sister-in-law of Mr. Gush's generation, who was also the clan leader's sister-in-law, Mrs. Qian, had heard it. What a group of spoiled young ladies. So many people can't even cook a meal, she said with disdain. After she finished speaking, she quickly thought about how they had chased the third son out of the house. She wanted to gossip, so she didn't even eat and went directly to the family leader's house to ask around. After getting the news, she immediately spread it around. They also quickly discovered that Gu Chungrui and his wife had moved to the Mother God Temple. They looked down on the Gu family even more. Almost the entire Shanghe village instantly knew that Gu Chungrui and his wife had been driven out to the Mother God Temple. However, although most of them sympathized with them, they didn't intend to get involved. After all, the two of them were considered an unlucky bunch. Moreover, Zhouing was considered a jinx, so they only pitied them but didn't do anything. However, it did not stop them from watching the fun and laughing at the women of the Gu family, who were so spoiled that they could not even do the housework well. Of course, after the news spread, some people also had ideas about Zhouing. After all, when the Gu family returned to the village, none of the women were bad-looking. At night, Zhouing and her husband sat around the fire and boiled a pot of iced pear to drink. After drinking it, they were about to enter the inner space when Gu Chungrui noticed someone loitering nearby. He immediately made a shushing gesture to Zhouing. After Zhouing understood, she bent down to pick up 2 big pieces of firewood and gently walked over, handing one to him. After that, the two of them stood on both sides of the door, quietly waiting for the people outside to come in so that they could trap them before they beat them up. About 15 minutes later, the footsteps gradually approached. The two immediately raised a large piece of firewood and readied themselves. After a while, they saw 2 short men, one in front of the other, cautiously come in. They were stunned when they saw both husband and wife standing on both sides with firewood. Then, the two of them looked at each other and pounced on Gu Chungrui simultaneously. As long as they could take him down, Zhouing would be nothing to worry about. Seeing this, Gu Chungrui was amused. Then, he swung the stick and hit the shoulder of the man on the left. The man screamed and fell to the ground, holding his arm and screaming. The other one was so frightened that he turned around and wanted to run. Seeing this, Gu Chungrui immediately jumped and kicked the other person in the back. Chapter 18 Ideas 2. The man staggered and fell to the ground. He screamed and covered his nose. When he saw the blood dripping to the ground through the gaps between his fingers, he immediately got up and tried to run away. Zhouing, who was already blocking the door, kicked him on the shoulder before he could get up. She took 2 steps forward and stepped on his back, making him unable to get up. Then, she bent over and patted his face with the firewood. She asked with a smile, "Who are you? What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Remember to tell the truth. I've heard that there are wolves on this mountain, so no one should be able to find out if you disappear, right? Whoever speaks first will suffer less. The other can enjoy being my punching bag," Gu Chungrui said, and he picked up the man who had been knocked down and placed the two of them side by side. The two of them cried out for mercy simultaneously because they clearly realized that this young couple were not pushovers but wolves in sheep's clothing. They were really ruthless. Spare your life? You would need to give us something in return, right? We will spare whoever says it first, Zhouing said as she exerted more force on her feet. Cough, they'll talk, they'll talk. We heard you were driven out to this broken temple, so we thought of coming over to steal some silver. The man at Zhou Ying's feet immediately replied. The other one nodded and said, Yes, we just want to steal some silver. Really? Why doesn't it look like it? If you're a thief, there's no need to hurt us, right? You guys obviously want to kill me after coming in. Gu Chungrui squatted down and looked at the two of them with a faint smile. Of course, he was also trying to test if the two were lying. He didn't expect the two to really avoid looking at him. This proved that they had other motives. However, he didn't press them any further. Instead, he asked, "What are your names? Which village are you from?" "I'm Qianzhuang, from Day Village. My nickname is Hu Zi." The person under Zhou Ying's feet hesitated, but still reported his name with a bitter face. The other one, afraid of being killed, also quickly followed and signed up. "I'm Gu Erjiang, nicknamed Leopard." Gu Chengrui looked at the two of them in surprise and mocked. "So it's the village's famous brothers of the tiger and leopard. I've been disrespectful." "No, no. Can we get up now?" Gu Erjiang smiled apologetically. Gu Shengru's face turned cold, and he punched him in the face. Then, he punched him 5 or 6 times in a row, making him cry out. His thin face was instantly swollen into a pig's head. Then, he gave Qianzhuang 2 slaps and said, "Are you trying to fool me? Don't think I don't know what you're up to. I won't be satisfied even if I kill you 100 times." After he finished speaking, he turned around and stepped between the two of them. He picked them up by their collars and carried them out. After they left the temple, they pushed the two of them up the mountain. Looking at the pitch-black forest and thinking about what Zhouing had just said about feeding them to the wolves, the tiger and leopard brothers suddenly felt their legs begin to go weak. They immediately begged, "Mr. Gu, please spare our lives. We were wrong. We won't do it again. Please spare us this time." Gu Chengrui did not answer them. Instead, he pushed them forward even harder. He knew very well that they would not let this slide if he did not teach these hooligans a lesson. Seeing that he was insistent on pushing them to their deaths, the two men wanted to put up a final struggle. After exchanging a glance, they pounced directly on Gu Chengrui. Chapter 19 Oath. However, Gu Chengrui had already expected that they would resist. So, when they turned around, he opened his arms and held their heads in each hand, slamming them into the middle. The two of them immediately cried out in pain, then shook their heads out of pain. The slightly taller Qianzhuang was in a miserable state. He immediately covered his injured nose and started crying. "You're a big man. How do you have the cheek to cry when you're injured? Hurry up. You can cry later when you are up against a wolf." After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he went forward and pushed them forward again. "We'll fight it out with you. At most, we'll die together." Qianzhuang returned to his senses and threw a punch at him. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui immediately raised his leg and kicked his stomach. Changzhuang fell on his butt and happened to sit on a small sharp stone. He immediately jumped up while shouting in pain. Her heart-wrenching look made Gu Chengrui laugh. Seeing this, Gu Erjiang quietly lifted a stone and tried to sneak an attack on him. Gu Shengru's ears twitched when he heard the whoosh of the wind. He dodged to the side and raised his hand to hit the joints on Gu Erjiang's arm simultaneously. The stone in his hand fell to the ground instantly. Then, Gu Chengrui kicked his leg. The man screamed and knelt on the ground. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui picked up the two of them again and said, "It seems that we can't settle this peacefully. Then, I won't be polite to you guys anymore." After he finished speaking, he pushed and shoved again. But this time, he used more force. He would kick them a few times if any of them didn't behave. Just like this, the three of them kept moving and stopping. After a few rounds of fighting, the tiger and leopard brothers had become entirely meek. They were completely under Gu Shengru's control. They could not even last 3 moves against him, and they were now even more injured. In the end, Qianzhuang knelt down and kowtowed. "Brother Gu, Mr. Gu, please spare our lives. We were wrong. Please spare us this once. We won't dare to do it again." Yes, we will definitely avoid you in the future." Gu Erjiang immediately chimed in. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui sneered. "I can't trust you. You too should die." The two of them were startled when they heard that. They looked at each other, then crawled 2 steps forward, one of them grabbing onto one of his legs and saying, "We swear that if we have any evil thoughts in the future, we will be struck by lightning and die a terrible death." "No, it's a fate worse than death," Gu Chengrui said. Yes, a life worse than death." The two of them immediately nodded in agreement. "Then he'll believe you this once. But remember, you only have this one chance. If there's a next time, it'll definitely make you regret being born into this world." After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, He raised his hand and jabbed their clavicle acupuncture points. The two of them immediately felt a tightness in their chests and couldn't help but let go. They remembered his fighting skills. Every time he hit them, it would be excruciating, and he would especially hit the places that hurt. At that moment, Qianzhuang thought of something and asked, "Brother Gu, do you perhaps know medical skills?" "A little. Although I can't treat any serious illness, it's more than enough to deal with you and even make you wish you were dead." "I understand. I understand. Then, can we go now?" Qianzhuang nodded and stood up. "Remember the oath you took. Also remember, you only have one chance." Definitely. If we have any other devious thoughts, we'll be better off dead." After Qianzhuang replied solemnly, he quickly helped Gu Erjiang up and walked down the mountain. When Gu Chengrui and his group of 3 had just left the Mother God Temple, a wild dog rushed over after smelling blood. Chapter 20. Worthy Friendship. Zhouing immediately retreated to the side to guard against the dog. At the same time, she took out a bottle of pepper spray from her inner space. Although it wouldn't do much to it, it wouldn't be a problem to choke from the pepper spray and run away. After walking around, the wild dog didn't find anything to eat, so it went to their temporary stove. In the end, it barked a few times in grievance and helplessness, crawled to the side, and closed its eyes. Looking at its listless appearance, Zhouing remembered the feeling of cold and hunger she felt when she first transmigrated. It was really pitiful. However, she didn't want it to live here. After all, this kind of wild animal might have lice, fleas, and other pests, so she had to be careful. Ultimately, she took out a piece of rib about 2 pounds in weight from her interspace and tried to lure it out of the Mother God Temple. Sure enough, the dog stood up immediately when it smelled the blood from the rib, staring at the meat in her hand with an eager look. Zhouing was happy to see this. She deliberately waved the rib in her hand to lead it out. After leaving the Mother God Temple, she threw the rib into the grass not far away. When the wild dog saw this, it immediately barked and rushed over. It picked up the ribs with its mouth and quickly ran into the forest. After Zhouing returned, she put everything into her interspace and sprayed the Mother God Temple with pesticide. Because the smell was too bad, she could only turn around and walk out. As soon as she stood still, she saw a figure running up the mountain. When the person got closer, she saw the person clearly. She exclaimed in surprise, "Mr. Tian, what are you?" "Mrs. Gu, are you all right? I heard someone screaming on the mountain earlier and was afraid that something might have happened to you, so I came to take a look." Tian Zhaowang asked while panting. "There were 2 crooks, but my husband chased them away." Those screams came from the 2 crooks. "Those crooks, do you know who they are?" "One is called Qianzhuang, and the other is called Gu Erjiang. It's these 2 scoundrels again. This isn't a place to stay for long. You have to make plans as soon as possible." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw 2 figures supporting each other and limping down the mountain. Behind him was a thin and weak figure. Zhouing saw him and immediately waved her hand. "Rui." Tian Zhaowang heaved a sigh of relief when he saw him. At the same time, he waved his hand and said, "It's good that Mr. Gu is fine. Then it would be best if you guys rested early. He'll be going back now." "Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Tian. Do come in for a while," Gu Chengrui said as he jogged over. "Another day. I'm worried as my house is not locked." After Tian Zhaowang finished speaking, he turned around and ran down the mountain. "Sure, let's meet up some other day," Gu Chengrui quickly replied. We'll talk about it later." Tian Zhaowang waved his hand and ran down the mountain. Mr. Tian is really a warm-hearted person. Just because he heard a scream from the mountain, he ran up in the middle of the night to help. Zhouing said as she looked at his back, "This person is indeed honest and worth befriending." After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he frowned. He wrinkled his nose and looked at Zhouing. "Babe, how much pesticide did you spray? The smell is too strong." "I had no choice. A wild dog ran in just now. I was afraid it would leave fleas, so I sprayed more." "Wild dog? It seems that after selling the medicinal herbs we got this time, we'll have to find a house as soon as possible." "Well, I think it's better to rent a house in town and start a small business. Then we can slowly get by." Gu Chungrui hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. With the Chow family here, we have to avoid them temporarily. It's better to find a house in the village and stay there first. When we have enough connections to compete with the Chow family, then only we can start our business. Chapter 21. Dreaming once again. When Zhouing heard him say this, she remembered that the Chow family had repeatedly sabotaged Mr. Gu and his uncle's business. She had no choice but to keep quiet. After that, they talked about the tiger and leopard brothers. Zhouing knew they would settle down for the time being, so she did not ask much. When the smell in the temple was almost gone, it was tranquil on the mountain. Then, the two returned to her interspace after walking behind the Mother God statue. After entering the space, Zhouing planted 200 acres of sweet potatoes and all kinds of rice seedlings. Next, she planted winter wheat, millet, beans, and sesame seeds. After Gu Chungrui finished feeding the animals, he slaughtered some mature roosters and asked Zhouing to put them in the warehouse. The following day, the two of them decided to go up the mountain again to pick some herbs after dinner. They would sell them together when they collected enough herbs. After they set off, Gu Chungrui saw that Zhouing had been listless all this time after she woke up. He turned his head and asked worriedly, "Something on your mind? Let's talk about it together." "It's nothing much. I just dreamed that I became a fairy again. I dreamt that I was living in the empty palace. Apart from planting, I was bored and played with all kinds of small animals, or tried to find something to do. I felt very lonely. It made me think of the years after my grandfather passed away. I was almost cut off from the world, which was really hard." After Gu Chungrui heard this, he still could not figure out what was happening. However, his heart ached for her, so he said half-jokingly, "You heartless little thing. Why didn't you dream of me? I will always be with you no matter what." After saying that, he leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. He smiled evilly and said, "Did you miss me because we haven't slept together for the past 2 days? It's not the same thing at all, okay?" Zhouing pushed his head away and said, "I think it's the same thing. I think I should move back and sleep with you tonight, so you won't have to worry." Zhouing hesitated for a moment, but finally gave in. She felt that her dreams for the past 2 nights were a little weird. An inexplicable feeling in her heart made her feel a little uneasy. Sleeping back together would be an excellent time to try and see what was going on. Then, the two of them chatted while cutting firewood and digging up herbs. With Gu Chungrui leading the way, the two of them dug up a lot of good specialties in one day. There were high-quality red sages, some angelica roots and bitter sages, 2 large pieces of poria, more than 30 pounds of fresh ginger, and more than 50 pounds of wild yam. It was already dark after they went down the mountain. As soon as they entered the Mother God temple, Zhouing saw the wild dog that had come last night. Seeing her come in, it immediately jogged over, stood a meter away from her, wagged its tail, and barked twice in a low voice. Seeing this, Gu Chungrui immediately thought of what she had said about feeding the wild dogs yesterday. He could not help but smile. "All right, it's most likely going to stick to you from now on. However, this dog is quite beautiful. Judging from the color of its fur, it should be fine. It will be a good thing for us if we can tame it." After he finished speaking, he took the sack he was carrying and placed it by the wall, taking the one from her as well. "Then let's see if it's fated. It's used to being wild, so it might not be able to stay in one place." After Zhouing finished speaking, she stuck her head out and looked around. After making sure no one was nearby, she took out a ready chicken from her inner space and threw it at the dog. When the wild dog saw this, it went forward and circled around her happily. Then, it picked up the chicken and ran away quickly. Chapter 22. Nightmare. After the dog left, Zhouing sprayed some pesticide, then sat on a stone to rest for a while. She then took up the kitchen utensils and started cooking. She cooked a pot of millet congee, steamed 5 buns, and stir-fried some mushrooms with meat. After the meal, the two cleaned up the medicinal herbs they had dug out. After the village quieted down, the two of them returned to the inner space with the items. Later that night, the two of them slaughtered 5 sheep, 2 cows, and a donkey. They washed up and went to bed together. In the middle of the night, Gu Chungrui heard Zhou Ying's fearful sleep talk and immediately shook her awake. Baby, wake up. You're dreaming. There's nothing to be afraid of. Zhou Ying was stunned for a moment when she woke up. She returned to her senses and hugged him. She responded by nestling into his arms to calm her emotions. Seeing this, Gu Chungrui hugged her in his arms. After tidying her messy hair, he patted her back and asked softly, "What did you dream of just now? Tell me. I'll be fine once you say it out." I dreamed of a great disaster. At one moment, there were 1,000 miles of barren land with starving people everywhere. Another moment, it was the roar of a huge flood. In short, it was very terrifying. In the end, I even dreamt of people exchanging children for food. It was so frightening to see. Zhou Ying replied with a heavy tone. Gu Shengru's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. He remembered that Dr. Luo had mentioned the drought in the north. Could it be that she was receiving some sort of warning from the strange dreams she had? If it was in the past, he might have found this ridiculous. But with their transmigration and the inexplicable inner space she had, he couldn't help but think more about it. Don't overthink about it too much. It's just a dream. If you're feeling uneasy, just plant more sweet potatoes, he said in a relaxed tone. Well, it's better to be prepared. Zhou Ying nodded in agreement. At the same time, she was planning to plant all the white sweet potatoes in any available space in her inner space. After this discussion, neither of them could fall asleep. It was almost 5:30. The two did not lie down again, instead getting up and going outside for some exercise. After thoroughly stretching their muscles and joints, the two packed up the medicinal herbs they had dug up in the past 2 days and carried them out of the inner space. After a simple breakfast, the sky was bright, and the two of them carried their things down the mountain. When they reached the foot of the mountain, they happened to see Tian Duang pushing an empty cart into town. Mr. Tian. Gu Chungrui immediately went forward to greet him. What are you doing so early in the morning? Haven't we started harvesting cabbages recently? They'll go to the farm at the edge of the town to help out for 2 days. After Tian Duang finished speaking, he looked at the sackcloth bags on their backs and said, You guys are going to town too? Put your things in the cart. We'll give you a ride on the way. Thank you, Mr. Tian. After Gu Chungrui thanked him, he put his sack into the cart. Then, he took the sack from Zhou Ying's and put it on the cart as well. Of course, they didn't just stand there and watch but helped him push the cart on each side. The three of them chatted as they walked into town. At the same time, the couple also found that only 2 rooms were available in the village. One was a house owned by a widow with a child that was not suitable for rent. The other household was the 6th uncle of the Gu family, which was the neighbor of the Gu family house they left. The two of them immediately rejected the idea. First, it was too close to the Gu family, and there might be conflicts. The other one was because of the 6th aunt of the Gu family, Madame Qian. She was a famous gossip in the village. Even a fart from them would spread throughout the village if they lived with her. As for the other empty houses, they were all so worn down that no one could live in them. When they arrived at the town's entrance, the couple carried the medicinal herbs on their backs and bade farewell to Tian Duang before heading to the Luo's clinic. Chapter 23. Arrogant servant Dr. Luo saw them carrying 2 big sacks and immediately welcomed them into his backyard. He asked his apprentice to make them tea before asking Gu Chungrui, Young man, it looks like your complexion looks much better. Thank you, Dr. Luo. Other than a slight cough, there's nothing serious. To put it bluntly, it's because you are still young. However, taking 2 more doses of medicine is better to prevent it from happening again. Gu Chungrui nodded and said, I will. By the way, we've dug up some red sage in the mountains these past 2 days, but there's not much. In addition, there are some other medicinal herbs. Can you help us take a look? After he finished speaking, he opened the sack and began to take out the medicinal herbs one by one. Don't worry about it. We'll take them all as long as the herbs are good. After Dr. Luo finished speaking, he bent down and started to help. He also carefully examined the quality of the herbs. When he saw the superior gastrodia roots, he had a bright smile on his face. After he was done, he stood up and said, Pretty excellent quality overall. The gastrodia roots and bitter sage are 150 copper per pound. The red sage is 100 copper, and the angelica roots and poria are 50 copper each. As for the yam and wild ginger, 10 copper each. What do you think? Sure. You can just weigh them directly. Please wait a moment. After Dr. Luo finished speaking, he went to his warehouse to get a scale and weighed the medicinal herbs one by one. In the end, they received 9 taels and 7 maces of silver. Of course, it was mainly because they had a lot of gastrodia roots, which weighed nearly 50 pounds in total. After that, they grabbed 2 more doses of medicine and left the clinic. Then, they went to the grocery store to buy 5 sets of bowls and chopsticks, a copper spoon for scoping rice, an earthen jar, and a wooden bucket. After they left the grocery store, Gu Chungrui handed Zhouing a wooden hairpin with a cloud pattern and asked, "See if you like it? What a beautiful carving. When did you buy it?" Zhouing took it and looked at its vivid pattern with a face of surprise. "When you're picking out the bowls, it's good that you like it." After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he paused and pulled her to his side. Following that, a 2-horse carriage carrying sheep in it quickly drove over. The coachman was even arrogantly waving his whip to drive away the passers-by on both sides of the road. He didn't even greet them. He just whipped away whenever he saw someone in front of the carriage, which caused a lot of wailing and complaints. After the carriage passed, a girl standing at the side said resentfully, "The Chow family is getting increasingly arrogant. They're even more condescending than the Gu family." "All right, stop talking. We can't afford to offend these people. If we meet them in the future, we'll just hide." A woman at the side pulled her away after she finished speaking. Zhouing had a better understanding of the Chow family after hearing that. She was sure that there was someone powerful supporting the Chow family. Otherwise, a servant from a wealthy family couldn't be so arrogant. It seemed that they really shouldn't place themselves in a situation against them. Otherwise, although it wouldn't be life-threatening in their current situation, it would definitely not be good. Then, she saw Gu Chungrui staring thoughtfully at the passing carriage. She raised her hand and shook it in front of his eyes. "What are you thinking about? Why are you so engrossed in it?" Gu Chungrui grabbed her hand and said, "Seeing those goats reminds me of something. The country specifically raises cattle and lamb for meat, but their prices are much higher than pork." When Zhouing heard him say this, she remembered that there were unique breeds, but most of them were provided to wealthy families or sold to restaurants. It was difficult to encounter them in the countryside except during the Lunar New Year or festivals. She thought about it and asked him, "You want to sell the meat we slaughtered last night?" Chapter 24 Saving Someone. I am planning to, but I am not rushing to. I'm thinking that maybe we can set up a farm in the future. First, it's more convenient to explain our meat. Second, it's much better than farming plants. Gu Chungrui turned around and asked, "By the way, is there anything else you want to buy? If not, we'll head back. Let's buy a pair of shoes each. I remember that the soles of your shoes are almost worn out." After Zhouing finished speaking, she pulled him directly into the shoe shop and spent 30 coppers on 2 pairs of ordinary cloth shoes. Finally, the two bought a stick of radish and a cabbage to cover their meals and walked back. It was almost noon when they arrived in the village. Zhouing took out the ready-made stewed beef in her interspace and stewed it together with half a white radish, eating them with a hot black steamed bun. After the meal, she hid the pots and bowls behind the Mother God statue. Zhouing returned to her interspace and wrapped 2 pounds of cakes in oil paper. After that, the young couple carried their gifts and went down the mountain. They thought about whether they could find a house in the village or maybe build a simple house to stay in for the winter. When they were about to reach the foot of the mountain, they suddenly heard children crying for help. The 2 of them looked at each other and immediately ran over. Then, they saw some children running into the village while some were shouting anxiously by the river shore. When they arrived at the river, they found a child struggling in the water, and he soon disappeared underneath it. Seeing this, Gu Chungrui immediately jumped into the river and swam toward the child who had fallen into the water. Zhouing called out to a child who was scared out of his wits with half of his legs wet. She asked, "Hey, how many children fell in?" Just teeny." The child replied with reddened eyes. "Okay." Quickly informed Tainia's family and asked them to bring a change of clothes. "I'll go now." The child nodded in response, then turned around and ran into the village. At this time, Gu Chungrui dragged out a 7 or 8-year-old boy who had passed out. The boy had some plants tied to his feet. Once they reached the shore, Gu Chungrui immediately performed first aid. After a while, the little boy spat out the water and started crying. He cried loudly, showing that he was pretty frightened. Seeing this, Zhouing breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's good that he's fine. Do you want to head back to the temple or village?" "Let's go back to the temple. We have the medicine to expel the cold. We must change our clothes and drink medicine quickly, or we might fall seriously ill." After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he carried the little boy and rushed back quickly. When Zhouing heard him mention the medicine, she immediately understood and said, "Then I'll head back first to start brewing the medicine." After she finished speaking, she quickly ran up the mountain. After arriving at the Mother God Temple, she took out everything she had bought the last 2 times and prepared a set of clothes for Gu Chungrui. She also relit the fire and took out a large clay pot from her inner space to boil the medicine. After hesitating for a moment, she took out some straw and laid it next to the fire. When she was almost done with her preparations, Gu Chungrui walked in with Tiniu, who was shivering from the cold. Zhouing quickly pointed behind the statue and said, "Rui, quickly bring him over to take off his wet clothes." Gu Chungrui immediately walked over with Tiniu. He immediately understood when he saw that there were only his old blanket and clothes from his old home. After that, he took off Tiniu's clothes and put his original clothes on him. Then, he wrapped him up with the blanket and finally twisted his clothes to dry his hair. After making sure he wasn't dripping wet, he said to the kid, "You go over there and warm yourself up by the fire. I'll change my clothes." Chapter 25. The village chief's grandson Tiniu shivered from the cold. When he heard that there was a fire, he immediately wrapped himself in his blanket and ran over. When Zhouing saw him coming out, she immediately called for him to sit on the straw bed she had prepared. She lit the fire for him and said, "Slowly dry your hair. Otherwise, you'll get a headache from the cold wind." "Okay," Tiniu replied. He immediately stretched his head out and fanned his hair before slowly drying it. Seeing this, Zhouing had to go forward and help him dry his hair. At that moment, Gu Chungrui had also finished changing his clothes. He came out with his wet clothes in his hand and handed them to her. "Baby, we'll stoke the fire. You can wring the clothes and hang them outside." "All right," he said. When Zhouing felt the thermal underwear hidden under the clothes, she immediately got what he meant and turned to go out. She saw 3 people rushing up the mountain when she left the temple. After wringing the water out, she immediately walked to the side and put the thermal underwear into her interspace. Then, she hung the wet clothes on a large rock next to the temple. Just then, the 3 people also came up. Noticing the woman in the lead carrying a large bag, Zhouing wanted to go forward and greet her. But the 3 people had already walked into the temple. When they saw the tightly wrapped Tiniu sitting by the fire, the 3 finally heaved a sigh of relief. The woman carrying the bundle was Tainius' mother, Mrs. Bai. When she saw Tainius' trembling appearance, she scolded him with tears flowing down her face. "You stupid kid! How many times have I told you not to go into the water? Never go into the water. You never listen." This time, before she could finish her sentence, Tiniu immediately opened his mouth and started crying. Seeing this, Mrs. Bai cried too and said, "Don't cry anymore. Mom won't scold you anymore. But you also have to." The man beside her, who was Tainius' father, Qin Jiashi, immediately stepped forward and took the bag from her. He walked forward and lifted Tiniu along with his blanket. Then, he turned around and used the blanket as a cover to change his clothes. When Zhouing saw this, she stepped forward and took over brewing the medicine. At the same time, the village chief walked to Gu Chungrui and cupped his hands in salute. "I would like to thank the 2 of you. Otherwise, my stubborn grandson, Tiniu, would have been in deep trouble." Gu Chungrui quickly stopped him from saluting. "Grandpa Qian, you're too courteous. No one would ignore it if they saw it." At the same time, he was very surprised. He really didn't expect to save the grandson of the village chief by chance. It seemed that their luck was pretty good. There was a high chance that they could get a house now. "It is fate that we meet." Gu Chungrui sneezed 3 times in a row right after the village chief finished speaking. The village chief hurriedly said, "You will catch a cold. Hurry over and warm up by the fire. I already had someone get a doctor. Later, the doctor will take a look and prescribe some medicine for you. I have some cold-dispelling medicine here. It's already been boiled. When the doctor comes, just let him take a look at Tiniu. I don't need it." After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he immediately went to the fire to warm himself up. Seeing this, the village chief also followed. He sat on the bed of straws at the side and chatted with him. Only then did he remember that the couple had been staying here for the past few days. It was already starting to freeze at night, and they couldn't stay here any longer. He looked at Gu Chungrui and asked, "That's right. I remember you talking about looking for a house 2 days ago. Have you found a suitable one?" "We've asked around, but there really isn't a suitable house in the village. What are your plans next? Do you think you can give us a piece of land? We'll build a house to stay in for the winter and make further plans after spring. Do you have money to build a house?" Chapter 26 House Visiting. Both of us know a little about medicine, so we dug up some medicinal herbs in the mountains these last 2 days and exchanged them for a few taels of silver in town. I think it should be enough to build a mud house in the village. The village chief was stunned for a moment and asked in surprise, "If you know about medicines, do you know how to treat diseases?" When I was studying in the capital, I learned some simple medical knowledge from the doctors in the academy. Some common minor illnesses should not be a problem. Gu Chungrui nodded. According to his memory, although the original him had not officially studied medicine, he had a good relationship with the doctors in the academy. As long as he was free, he would go over and help them. His second brother, Gu Qingye, who was his classmate, knew about this. This was why he could make this claim without fear of the Gu family exposing him. That's great. It turns out that Dr. Xia, from our village, fell down a hill and passed away at the end of last spring when he went to the mountain to pick herbs. If any villager is sick, they have to run to town. So if you can cure them, it will be convenient for everyone. Then I'll go and prepare some medicinal herbs. I'll try my best to treat the villagers, and it can be considered an extra income for us. Yes, that's right. It's a win-win situation. When the village chief said this, he realized that he had gone off topic. He said embarrassedly, "As for the land you mentioned building a house on, I think you should consider it carefully. Although you can build a house now, it will take at least 1 or 2 months." At that point, he hesitated for a moment and said, "If you don't mind, I have an old house that I can pass to you, but it has to be renovated." Gu Chungrui was stunned for a moment and nodded in agreement. "You're right. When can we go and look at the house?" "The house is at the village entrance, near the foot of the mountain. When your hair is done drying, we can go over and have a look. If you like it, we'll find someone to renovate it as soon as possible." "Thank you so much. If there's anything we can do for you in the future, this is part of my job anyway. When you're free in the future, do come over and visit." The village chief smiled and nodded. After that, the two of them chatted for a while longer. When his hair was almost dry, the medicine was ready. Zhouing gave each of them a bowl of medicine. After the two of them finished drinking the medicine, Qian Jiaxi and his wife thanked them and went home with Tiniu. The village chief took the couple to the foot of the mountain to have a look at the house. They didn't expect that the house was built about 30 meters from the river, and the Tian family's house was next to it. The village chief opened the door and walked in. "You guys go in and see if you'll like it." "Don't mind if we do." After Gu Chungrui said that, he went in with Zhouing to take a look. The house wasn't big. Walking in, there was ample open space of about 30 square feet. There was a table on the opposite side of the room, allowing the room to be used as a living room. On the east side of the house was a brick bed that could be used as a bedroom. On the west side was a small room of less than 20 square feet. The easternmost end of the house was connected to a small room of about 10 square feet. 2 connected stoves were in the room, allowing the room to be used as a kitchen. After turning around, Gu Chungrui looked at the wall. If he wasn't wrong, the supporting wall was made of a 3-in-1 composite soil. He was delighted with its hardness and smoothness. However, the roof was full of holes, and the beams looked rotten. It seemed that they really had to ask the village chief to renovate it before they could live in it. As for the few window frames left barely intact, they had to be changed entirely. After looking around, he turned to Zhouing and asked, Babe, do you like it? Chapter 27 Settle down, it's all right. It's enough for us to live in for the time being. Zhouing said. Then it's decided. After that, the two of them walked toward the village chief, who was looking around the house and said, Grandpa Qian, how much does this house cost? There are only a few walls left intact in this broken house. How can I ask for money? However, the size of the land is 1 acre total. So you have to pay 2 taels of silver for the land itself. After the chief finished speaking, he led them to the backyard. He pointed at a large piece of cabbage patch and said, This is a vegetable garden occupying less than 80% of the land. We have been planting in it for the past few years. You can plow them over and plant on them directly in spring. Thank you, Grandpa Qian. Gu Chungrui clasped his hands and thanked him. So it's decided? The village chief turned his head and asked. Yes, it'll have to trouble you to help us gather some people to fix the house as soon as possible. Sure, let's talk about it in detail. After the village chief finished speaking, he brought Gu Chungrui to the front to discuss how to renovate the house. As for Zhouing, she returned to the mountain. She heard a faint dog bark from afar, so she hastened her steps and rushed up the mountain. When she arrived outside Mother God Temple, she realized it was the wild dog she had previously fed. It was currently facing Gu Chengxi, who was carrying a basket on his back at the temple entrance. Chengxi, you are here. Take a rest inside. She quickly stepped forward and greeted him. After she finished speaking, she waved at the wild dog and waited for it to leave before she brought Gu Chengxi into the Mother God Temple. Gu Chengxi followed her in with lingering fear and asked, Third sister-in-law, since when did you have such a big dog? After saying that, he put the basket aside and sat on a rock by the fire. I didn't purposefully rear it. I just leave some food aside for it every day. This dog sure is loyal, he quipped. Why else would they say dogs are loyal? After Zhouing finished speaking, she took out a new bowl, poured some water into it, and handed it to him. Gu Chengxi took it and drank half a bowl before saying, You have become much more cheerful after coming out. At least I'm feeling more comfortable now that there's no one pressing on me constantly. Gu Chengxi laughed dryly and did not reply. Instead, he asked, I just heard that my third brother went into the river to save the village chief's grandson, Tiniu, in the afternoon. Is he all right now? He's fine. We've been digging up some medicinal herbs in the mountains these past 2 days. We've exchanged them for a few doses of medicine for your third brother in town. He's much better now. Zhouing said. Gu Chengxi was stunned for a moment. He really did not expect them to make a living by relying on medicinal herbs. He was happy for them and was piqued by the notion at the same time. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something. However, he changed his mind. It's good that my third brother is okay. If you need any help, just ask. Well, I have to go and collect firewood now. After he finished speaking, he drank the rest of the water, picked up the basket, and walked out. All right, come over when you're free. Once Zhouing said that, she sent him off. Afterward, she put the clothes she had hung outside into her inner space. After a while, Gu Chungrui rushed back and asked for 3 taels of silver for the timber needed for the renovation. He then went down the mountain again once he got them. When he returned, it was already around 8 o'clock in the evening. Seeing that the rice was still warm in the pot, he raised his head and asked, Babe, have you eaten? I've eaten. I was afraid you hadn't eaten, so I left some for you. I've eaten at the village chief's house, and the matter of the house's renovation has been settled. Other than the cost of the materials, their salary is 10 copper a day, and we'll have to provide them with a meal at noon. Do we still have to provide food? Zhouing was a little miffed when she heard that. There is nothing here. How could they provide the food? I didn't want to at first, but the village chief suggested it. He said we could integrate into the village faster if they are happy with the food. After Gu Chungrui finished speaking, he grabbed her hand and said, It's been hard on you these past 2 days. We'll overcome any difficulties together. Chapter 28 Repairing the House 1. Zhouing knew she couldn't avoid it, so she asked, Then how many people's meals do we need to take care of? There are 10 people in total, 4 carpenters and 6 handymen. They don't need anything complicated. Some steamed buns or flatbread and a big pot of vegetables would be enough. As for the pot, we'll go to town tomorrow morning to buy a big one. We'll be able to use it in the future anyway. Zhouing nodded and told him about Gu Qing's visit. Gu Qingrui nodded at her, too, letting her know that he understood. After entering her inner space that night, Gu Qingrui gave himself 2 more 4 bottles just in case. At dawn, Zhouing was once again awoken by the disaster in her dream. This feeling of being overwhelmed by her dreams didn't give her a good feeling. She turned around, picked up the glass of water on the bedside table, and gulped it down in one go. Only when the cool water entered her stomach did she really wake up. Her moving about in bed woke up Gu Qingrui too. He did not know what to say after knowing that she had had the same dream again. He could only hold her in his arms and silently accompany her to calm her emotions. "Let's move out after tonight," he said. "Let's see whether you would still have this dream after we leave the Mother God Temple." Zhouing was stunned for a moment and finally nodded. The only change in her habit was staying in this Mother God Temple. Perhaps it was because of the location that she had constant bad dreams. But if it was really because of this location, could it mean that those disasters would really happen? Gu Qingrui saw that she was deep in thought and gently patted her back. "We need to be strong as forged iron. No matter what the future holds, we must be in an advantageous position similar to our previous lives as soon as possible." Zhouing nodded in agreement. Then, the two got up and began to exercise. When it was almost time, the two of them ate their breakfast in the inner space. After breakfast, the two packed everything up to prepare to move into their new home. Then, they hurried to town. First, they bought a huge pot, 10 sets of bowls and chopsticks, 5 pounds of pork belly, and 10 pounds of tofu. On her way back, while there was no one nearby, Zhouing took 20 pounds of black noodles and 5 pounds of peanut oil from her inner space. When they went to their new home, Qian Jiaxi had already brought his men to fix the roof. Gu Qingrui stepped forward and greeted them politely. Then, he went to the backyard to find an open space in the vegetable field and set up 2 simple stoves for Zhouing, one big and one small. Then, he took a bucket of water from the well in the village and went to the front to help. After Zhouing had prepped the big pot, she heated 2 pounds of peanut oil using their small pot and began deep frying the 10 pounds of tofu. Just as she finished, Qian Jiaxi's wife, Mrs. Bai, came over with 2 basins and said, "Good morning, Zhou. You're hardworking. Already this busy early in the morning." "Morning, Mrs. I started early because I feared it would take a long time to prepare the meals." "I thought so, so here I am." After Mrs. Bai finished speaking, she placed the 2 basins she had brought on the ground and said, "Girl, what are you planning to cook for lunch?" "I was just about to ask Mr. Jiaxi. I plan to go to the field and pick a few cabbages, then stir-fry the meat slices with stewed cabbages and tofu. They would go well with a few large baked flatbreads." "What's there to ask about? Just pick them and eat." When Mrs. Bai said this, she saw the large strip of streaky pork on the side and said, "I got to say, girl, you're sure generous to buy so much meat. Once everyone is content with the meal, only then will they have the energy to fix our house as soon as possible." "That's true." When Mrs. Bai heard her say this, she didn't say anything more. She was quite satisfied with her honesty. Unlike some of the Gu families, they deducted their family's meals until they were worse off than the villagers when they were in trouble. Chapter 29, Repairing the House 2. "Oh right, Auntie. How's Tinia doing? Did he have a fever?" "You don't say. He really did have a fever before he went to bed last night. Fortunately, it subsided in the middle of the night. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to leave. I can handle this on my own." "Why don't you?" "No need. My mother-in-law and second sister-in-law are both at home." "That's good." When Zhouing heard this, she thought of her dream and probed, "Auntie, is the Mother God Temple an accurate place for prayers to come true? I noticed the statue of Mother God had been weathered out of shape. Why is no one taking care of it?" Mrs. Bai hesitated for a moment. "How should I put this? I heard from the older generation that the Mother God Temple used to be quite accurate. Otherwise, every town wouldn't have a Mother God Temple. I don't know when it started, but whatever the people asked for, it didn't come true anymore. As time passed, no one worshipped her anymore, so naturally no one repaired it. Zhouing saw that she couldn't get the answer she wanted from her, so she didn't ask anymore. Instead, she asked her about the village. There were two surnames in the village, Qian and Gu, which comprised nearly 80% of the village's population. They shared one ancestral hall and one school. Therefore, despite some internal conflicts between the two families, they were still very united as a whole. The rest were the refugees their village had received intermittently over the years. As soon as she started talking, Mrs. Bai couldn't stop and began gossiping about the villagers, such as which family was on bad terms with which family's young man liked which family's young lady, etc. She even mentioned the Gu family, especially what they had done after they returned to the village. Zhouing didn't respond or interrupt her, but listened to her very patiently. Of course, she also knew that her sixth aunt-in-law had spread the news throughout the village and caused the Gu family to be embarrassed. The food was ready at about 11:30 in the afternoon. Zhouing saw that there were a lot of dishes, so she directly filled a clay pot full of food and handed it to Mrs. Bai. "Auntie, I've prepared more than enough food today. Take these home and let Grandpa Qian and the others try my cooking." "How can I do that?" Take it. You've been busy helping me for half a day. Don't I have to pay you for your work?" "No, take it. They'll have to trouble you to come over and help tomorrow. Otherwise, I really can't do it alone." After Zhouing finished speaking, she directly stuffed the food into her hand. "Well, all right, but only this once." "All right, just this once." After Mrs. Bai left, Zhouing went to the front and called everyone for lunch. After washing their hands, they went to the kitchen and saw the scrumptious stew in the pot. They were so happy that they couldn't close their smiles. Qian Jiaxi laughed. "Everyone, don't just watch. Quickly help yourself." After speaking, he picked up the bowl beside him and scooped himself a bowl. Yes, Gu Chengrui echoed. "Everyone, please don't be shy. Eat up." After he finished speaking, he handed Qian Jiaxi a pair of chopsticks. At that time, Zhouing also finished cutting the flatbreads and placed them next to the pot. "Just eat as much as you want until you're full. Missy, if we eat until we are full, we won't be able to do work in the afternoon," Qian Jiaxi said happily as he took out 2 pieces of flatbread. "Indeed, this is a tasty meal. It will not be easy to work after eating this." An old man in his 40s chimed in with a smile. "I've never had such a delicious meal before. They'll work if you don't pay me based on this meal alone." "Indeed, I think I won't be hungry for a day after eating this meal." Gu Chengrui and Zhouing saw that they were all delighted and also felt relieved. After they had filled their bowls, only then did the two of them fill their bowls and start eating. Chapter 30 Repairing the House 3. Although everyone ate as much as possible, there was still a large portion of vegetables, and nearly 1/3 of the flatbread was unfinished. After the meal, Zhouing washed the dishes and boiled a pot of hawthorn tea. Each of them drank a bowl and rested for half an hour before returning to work. They were obviously more hard-working than they were in the morning. As for Zhouing, she went to the front with Gu Chengrui to use sorghum stalks and hemp rope to weave the mat used for building the roof. At the Qian family's house, the village chief was sitting in the house drinking his tea. When he saw Mrs. Bai bring back a large clay pot of meat and vegetables, he asked in surprise, "Is this the lunch prepared by Gu Chengrui and his wife?" "Yes, and she made quite a lot. She had asked me to bring some back for you to try her cooking," Mrs. Bai said happily as she placed it in front of him. "I don't even need to taste it to know it's tasty by just smelling it. I'm feeling full just by looking at it. What a lovely couple. By the way, what do you think of her after talking to her this morning?" the village chief asked. "At the very least, she's a capable girl. Most importantly, she's sensible. We've been chatting for a long time, but she didn't say a single bad thing about the Gu family. Then it's definitely worth being friends with her just based on these 2 points. In the future, we should hang out more and introduce her to the people in the village." The village chief decided. "I understand, father. We'll go help out in the kitchen." After Mrs. Bai finished speaking, she turned around and walked out. At the Gu family. After everyone was seated, Mrs. Qiao looked at Mr. Gu and said, "Darling, I heard that your 3rd son bought an old house from the Qian family's 4th son. Is that true?" "It's true. They started to fix the house this morning. Mr. Gu replied. Let's not talk about the house. The land alone will cost a lot of money. Not to mention renovating the place will cost at least 5 taels of silver. Where did they get the silver from? Could it be that they secretly hid it back then? Mrs. Liu angrily said. Do you even believe what you just said? Mrs. Chow rolled her eyes at her. When Mrs. Liu heard this, she immediately shut her mouth in embarrassment. To be honest, she knew that they didn't have any money on them when they left their family. She was just a little curious about the origin of their money. I heard my third brother and his wife have been digging up medicinal herbs in the mountains for the past 2 days. They have earned some money from selling them. Gu Qingxi said. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten. Zhou is Imperial Physician Zhou's daughter. It's no wonder she recognized some herbs. If they dug up some ginseng or lingji, wouldn't they be rich? Mrs. Yao said with a regretful expression. She then looked at Gu Qingxi. Qingxi, go find them to guide you. Maybe you can really dig up something good. What are you thinking about? Let's not talk about how hard it is to find precious medicinal herbs. The season for a good harvest has already passed. Unless you are fortunate, how can it be so easy to find them? Second Uncle Gu glared at her and said, Let's start eating. No matter what, they finally have a place to stay. We can also breathe a sigh of relief. After Mrs. Chow finished speaking, she picked up her chopsticks and began to eat. When the others heard this, they also shut their mouths and heaved a sigh of relief. The rumors spreading throughout the village were really terrible. If the couple did not have a place to stay, their family clan might have to intervene in this matter. On the other hand, the Gu family's leader put down his bowl and said to his eldest son, Gu Qingjin, You've heard about Gu Chengrue and the others repairing his house, right? I heard Gu Chengrue saved the village chief's eldest grandson, Tiniu, from the river yesterday afternoon. The village chief then sold his old house to him and helped to find materials for him to renovate the house. Gu Qingjin put down his bowl and chopsticks and replied. After a moment of hesitation, he asked with uncertainty, Father, do you want us to go over and help? But the workshop? Chapter 31, Repairing the House, 4. The family clan leader nodded and said, It's not like the workshop is short of a person for a day or two. We can't let the Qin clan take care of our Gu clan's people. Isn't this a slap in the face of our Gu clan? Besides, I heard that Gu Chengrue has medical skills. In the future, if we are sick and urgently need medical attention, we might need to look for him. Don't ruin our relationship. We didn't do anything when they were separated from their family. Even if we do something now, they might not be grateful for our help. The patriarch's wife, Mrs. Wang, spoke at this time. That's right. If we had helped them before this, that would have been the help that they so desperately needed. Helping them now would only be like adding flowers to a bouquet. Gu Qingjin agreed. The main thing was that he could not stand Gu Shengru's indifferent attitude, as if he owed him 100 taels of silver. It's better to add flowers to a bouquet than to watch and not care. The clan leader said unhappily, then paused for a moment. By the way, don't we still have some wood in our house? Although it can't be used as a beam, it's not a problem to use it as rafters. We also have some sorghum stalk. Although it's not much, it's a kind gesture. Okay. Gu Qingjin responded unwillingly. After eating, he took his younger brother, Gu Chengxi, and got busy. The patriarch stood up and said to Mrs. Wang, Bring some dishes over later and see if there's anything you need help with. After he finished speaking, he went out and took some sorghum stalks from the storage room, then used them to make a broom and a curtain. Although these things were not valuable, they were essential in life. Mrs. Wang came out and saw how busy he was. She sighed, picked up the basket, and went to the cellar behind them. She took out more than 10 long radishes, a big melon, 2 small pumpkins, and some dried vegetables. She placed them on an ox cart that Gu Qingjin and his brother had packed and said, Let's go. Let's go together and see if there's anything else we can help with. Then Mother, do get in the cart. Gu Qingjin nodded and said, It's a good day today. Let's walk. After Mrs. Wang finished speaking, she walked out. Seeing this, the 2 brothers had no choice but to follow as they drove the cart. When they arrived, everyone had just started to get busy. Gu Chengrue was stunned when he saw them bringing something over. He quickly stood up and greeted them. Aunt, Brother Qingjin, Brother Chengxi, you've come? Zhouing also stood up and greeted everyone. Your uncle heard you bought a house and wanted to renovate it. He was afraid there wouldn't be enough materials, so he sent some over. Mrs. Wang said with a smile. Do give him my thanks. We really do lack wood at the moment, so don't mind if I do. Gu Chengrui hesitated for a moment before accepting it, because regardless of whether the other party wanted to save their dignity or had ulterior motives, he had no reason to refuse at the moment. Otherwise, they would definitely be on bad terms. However, as far as he knew, the clan leader was a good person. Otherwise, he would not have given the 100 acres of land and the oil mills dividends to the Gu family. Therefore, he decided to try to be on good terms with them. He immediately walked toward the ox cart with enthusiasm. On the other hand, Gu Qingjin and his brother looked at Gu Chengrui, who had changed from his usual enigmatic tone to a warm and welcoming one. They looked at each other and greeted each other happily. The three of them then started to unload the cart. On the other side, Zhouing invited Mrs. Wang to sit and said, Auntie, please sit down. Let me pour you a bowl of water. Don't worry about it. I came over after drinking enough water at home. Let's hurry up and make a mat so you can move in earlier. After Mrs. Wang finished speaking, she took over Gu Shengrui's position and busied herself with weaving the mat. Chapter 32, Repairing the House, 5. Seeing this, Zhou Ying could only respond, then I'll have to trouble you. Later, I will invite you and uncle to eat dumplings at our new home. Mrs. Wang paused and said, if there's a chance, they'll definitely try your cooking. However, for now, you should start getting your life in order as soon as possible. I definitely will. By the way, I heard that Chengrui has medical skills. Who did he learn from? Zhouing paused for a moment before smiling and nodding. He sure knew a little, but I heard that he only learned a little from the doctors in the academy. He can cure some common minor diseases, but is not sure about the rest. That's already good enough. At least you two can have a stable income with this skill. Mrs. Wang said happily. Her smile was much more sincere than it was at the beginning. When Zhouing saw this, she understood why they were here. However, she also understood that people were creatures of profit. As long as there was something to gain, there would only be opportunities to interact. As for how things would develop in the end, it would depend on the sincerity of both sides. Then, she learned about their family situation. The patriarch and his wife had 3 children. The eldest one was a girl. She had married a scholar from a low-income family in her early years, and now their family was working as government officials in other places. He had 2 sons. The older one, Gu Chengjin, had just gotten married 2 years ago. The woman was Fong Fong, a daughter of a landlord. They already had a son. The younger Gu Qingxi had been studying outside the family. He had been striving to be a scholar since middle school last year, but unfortunately, his path to the imperial examination had been cut off when the Gu family was in trouble. He was now helping to teach at the family school. After they unloaded the car, Gu Qingjin looked at Gu Chengrui curiously and asked, I didn't expect you to be so cheerful after the separation. One must always look forward. Some things should be put down, and some responsibilities should be taken up. After Gu Chengrui finished speaking with a smile, he turned his head and glanced at Zhouing. It's good that you can get over it, but I have to say that you're pretty lucky. Your wife is not only beautiful, but also capable and kind. In the future, live your life well. Gu Qingjin laughed and replied after hearing that. Indeed, fortune and misfortune come together, but no one can say for sure. Gu Chengrui nodded in agreement. Gu Chengxi snorted coldly and turned to leave. Seeing this, Gu Qingjin laughed and said, this kid has a one-track mind. Don't mind him. Let's go. Let's cut out the wood together and try to repair this house as soon as possible. Thank you, Brother Qingjin. After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he helped the carpenter cut the wood. At night, after everyone had left, Gu Chengrui and Zhouing did a simple sweep of the yard. Just as the two finished their work, Tan Zhuang pushed in half a cart of cabbage and said, You two are still busy? These are some cabbages that their owner doesn't want. I thought you guys would have no vegetables to eat, so I brought them over. Please don't mind them. How could we mind? You've solved our pressing problem. Come in and sit for a while. Zhouing said, No, I still have to go home for dinner. Let's meet up again after you guys have finished repairing the house. After Tian Jiaowang finished speaking, he slowly lifted the cart. Gu Chengrui quickly went forward to help push all the cabbages down and sent Tian Jiaowang out. On the other hand, Zhouing looked at the vegetables on the ground. They were all small vegetables and mostly leaves. No wonder the owner didn't want them. However, she could still prepare a lot from these vegetables, saving her the trouble of shamelessly picking vegetables planted by the village chief. Then, the two took out their kitchen knives and cleaned up all the vegetables. They then put them in the kitchen, the only room covered with a roof. After that, she cooked a pot of millet porridge, heated the remaining flatbread and dishes from lunch, and had a simple meal. Chapter 33 Completion Babe. Gu Chengrui asked after the meal, "Are we using the heated brick bed or building a floor heater?" Floor heating? Yes, it's the floor heating. It's too troublesome to build a wall heater, so we can build it to go underground. Zhouing hesitated for a moment. We'll do whatever's convenient. We won't be staying in this house for long anyway. All right, then I'll see to it. Gu Chengrui nodded. After that, the two of them chatted for a while, then closed the door and entered her inner space. After they finished working, they took a shower and slept. This time, Zhouing slept until dawn. She only woke up when Gu Chengrui had prepared breakfast. Then, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. It seemed that in the future, it would be better not to live in the temple. After the meal, Zhouing took advantage of the fact that no one had come yet and went to her inner space to use the noodle press machine to press 30 pounds of noodles. She took 5 pounds of streaky pork, some mustard, and some sweet sauce. She made fried sauce noodles and a side dish of shredded radish for lunch. However, on this day, not only did Mrs. Bai come to help with the cooking, but even Mrs. Wang had rushed over early. At the front, the father and son of the clan had also brought 3 disciples from the Gu clan to help. Even Gu Chengxi came over to help weave mats. When it was almost noon, the village chief and Qian Jiala transported the tiles over. 3 days later, the house was completely renovated. Even the wall was built with some mud bricks bought from the village. That night, Zhouing made fried sauce noodles again at everyone's request. At the same time, she braised a pig's head, 10 pig's trotters, mixed them with a pot of cabbage shreds, cooked a pot of 5 spice peanuts, and bought 10 pounds of wine. After everyone had eaten and drunk their fill, Gu Chengrui gave everyone their wages, and this was considered a complete end to their renovation. Zhouing saw that there was still some meat sauce left, so she scooped out 2 bowls and handed them to Mrs. Bai and Mrs. Wang. "Aunties, many thanks for your help these past 2 days. This is just a small gift, and I hope you won't reject it. If you give me something else, I might not accept it. But I really wanted more of this sauce after I tried it, so I definitely won't reserve myself." Mrs. Bai took it with a smile. Yes, this sauce is the best I've ever had. You have to teach me how to make it later." Mrs. Wang nodded in agreement. "Sure, come over when you're free. They'll teach you how to blow it up step by step." Zhouing said, "Then it's decided. After you've cleaned up the house, we'll come over and learn how to make this fried sauce." After Mrs. Wang finished speaking, she invited Mrs. Bai to go out with her. After sending them off, Zhouing cleaned up the kitchen, added more firewood, and returned to the house. She took a good look at the neat and tidy house. It really looked no different from a new one. It was just that the mat on the roof that was exposed outside looked very ugly. It seemed that she had better cover it. Otherwise, it would be terrifying if insects or mice fell on her while sleeping at night. Also, the construction of the floor heating was cancelled. It would be a pity to hack away the foundation made of 3-in-1 soil and bluestone. Gu Chengrui returned after sending off the clan leader and the rest. He saw her staring at the roof and immediately thought of something. "Don't worry. I scattered a lot of chemical powder on the beam. I guarantee there won't be any snakes, rats, insects, or ants. Then we'll just leave it exposed like this? It's like this over here. Let's not do anything special. At most, we can put a mosquito net on a branch or make a cover." "That's fine. By the way, when will the furniture be delivered?" "It's in 5 days, but should we buy the blanket or take it from the space?" "We'll buy it. I still have some silver. We can buy a small portion tomorrow to avoid being caught." "That's right. Let's buy 2 more sets of cotton-padded clothes and some food. After that, they cleaned the house carefully again and entered the inner space when night fell. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.